Chapter 501. Genius in a Second to Remember Love? Talk.net, providing you with wonderful novels to read. King's City of Grey Castle, Garden Mansion in the Inner City. Love go little, say net whoever since His Highness Roland Wimbledon launched a surprise attack on the palace and destroyed the Hall of Sky Dome, Theo's status had soared. All the members of the Dove and Top Hat respected him, and the intelligence organization had truly stabilized. In addition to these core members, Theo had been able to influence the decisions of the Skeleton Fingers after more than half a year of operation, and he was also well aware of the movements of the other mouse organizations. Whether it was in the patrol team or in Blackstreet, he had bribed informants. If it was just information, they would get paid, and these people didn't care who they worked for. Currently, he was still unable to infiltrate the upper nobles. That was a place where family background and titles were important. Gold royals alone would not be of much use. However, with the help of the rat leader, who was inextricably linked to the nobles, some unimportant information would often leak into his ears. For example, the news he was hearing now. Timothy will send a team of about 500 people to block the Redwater River? Theo tapped the armrest of his chair and said, "He's really going to do that?" "Yes," Rockhill said in a muffled voice. "At least half of them are Blood Sale Association rats." Boss said it himself. "Because it's a lucrative job, there was internal strife in the gang yesterday and 5 or 6 people were killed or injured." "It's indeed a lucrative job," Clown whistled. "Think about it. What can they intercept? Merchant ships. What are the consequences of violating the king's ban? Of course, they confiscate the goods and extort a large sum of money. Is there anyone better at this than the rats? Of course. The patrol team is not bad either. Love go little sage neku, since half of them are rats, I think the other half are the guards of the false king," Hillfox said calmly. This morning, someone noticed 4 hawk-headed ships at the suburban pier. Theo could not help but frown. The hawk-headed ship was a kind of river warship with a slender hull, sails, and oars. It was very fast. Below the waterline, there was a raised ram, and there were iron hooks on both sides of the ship. Once it caught up with the target, it could be tightly locked together so that the soldiers on the ship could jump over and fight. Ordinary merchant ships could not escape its pursuit. So, to sum up the intelligence, the false king plans to send a fleet of 500 people to block the Redwater River, including 4 warships and more than 200 fully armed guards? He sighed secretly. This is not good news. Timothy's plan to block the trade route had been leaked long before the months of demons, but at that time, most people thought that he would set the checkpoint near the canal and completely ban the trade with the western region. After all, the lords of Silver City and Redwater City would not be happy to see them lose a large sum of money because of an inexplicable order. Forcibly setting the checkpoint on the border between the western region and the central region would only make the local lords destroy the checkpoint. But with 4 warships, the situation was different. First of all, the other lords had almost no ability to fight on the water. Warships could freely come and go along the Redwater River, and the caravan could be intercepted at any place. Even if they wanted to do something, they would not be able to do it. Second, this reaction showed Timothy's determination to deal with the western region. He was determined to do this even if it would make him hostile to the other lords. Theo looked at Hill, who nodded at him, seeming to have also thought of this. Timothy probably won't set a fixed checkpoint, but will use the Redwater River to attack any caravan he sees. When they fight on the water, they are pirates, and when they come ashore, they are bandits. A fleet of 500 people is a nightmare for any caravan. In this way, the western region may really be cut off from supplies. "I will report this news to His Highness as soon as possible," Theo said in a low voice. Last year, Border Town had purchased a large amount of food, clothing, and ore, and now they had annexed Longsong Stronghold. In theory, the number of supplies they needed would be further increased. If their trade routes were cut off, it would inevitably be a great trouble for His Highness. Theo did not know whether he would be able to smoothly solve this thorny problem. At this moment, the sound of flapping wings came from the garden. Theo got up and pushed open the small door of the backyard. A gray falcon, like lightning, flew into the house, circled around, and landed on his shoulder. Seeing that it was a letter from the Western region, the members of the circus unanimously put their hands on their chests and bowed their heads to show respect. Theo took the note and opened it, quickly scanning the contents of the secret letter. His heart fiercely jumped. Ha, ha. Then he could not help but laugh. Although he knew that as an intelligence officer, he should not reveal his expression, but this news was too surprising, and he could not suppress the joy in his heart. It seems that we don't have to worry about this matter. Does His Highness already know? He looked up and asked. No, he is about to fundamentally solve this problem, he said excitedly in a low voice. Fundamentally? The clown was puzzled. You mean? Yes, His Highness' First Army has already set off, and their target is King's City. Theo clenched his fists. The time to pull Timothy off the throne has come. Although he knew that His Highness would launch an operation this year, he did not expect it to be so soon. For the sake of confidentiality, His Highness had not told him the specific plan of action. Only today did he know that the offensive was actually scheduled for spring, and it just happened to be at the time of spring plowing. I have finally waited for this day. Hill took a deep breath and suddenly knelt down on one knee. What orders does His Highness have? Please tell us. The other 5 people also knelt down. For the new king. Theo's mood was also stirred up. That's right, he thought, if Timothy fell from power, Roland Wimbledon would become the only heir to the kingdom of Grey Castle, he would take over the crown and be crowned king, and Theo might also leap into the upper echelons of power, climbing a new stage that he had never thought of before. As for the odds of winning this war, and whether Timothy could stop His Highness Roland, he did not even think about it. Anyone who had witnessed the Battle of the First Army would not have any doubts about the result of the spring offensive. His Highness' order is not to approach the West City Gate on the day of the siege, and at the same time, to restrain the rats from taking advantage of the chaos and restore the post-war order as soon as possible. Theo slowly read the second half of the secret letter. Provide as much help as possible to the suffering civilians, such as medical treatment, shelter, and food supplies. After the order is stabilized, hand over to the First Army to deal with it. That's it? The crowd looked at each other. Don't we need to trick the city gate into opening, or set fire everywhere to attract the attention of the garrison? Chapter 502. Genius in a Second to Remember Love/Go/Small? To provide you with wonderful novels to read. Roland stood on the rooftop of the bridge command room, looking at the long fleet behind him in a straight line, his heart surging. Except for the flagship, Roland, the rest of the ships were slow and clumsy concrete ships, but when more than a dozen of them were put together, it was still a spectacular sight. The white smoke coming out of the chimneys formed a long line, and the river swayed to both sides because of the huge fleet. The bow of the ships rose and fell as they broke through the waves, giving them an indomitable momentum. As the flagship, the gunboat was the most dazzling star of the fleet. Its towering bridge and slender shape made it completely different from ordinary sailboats and concrete ships. Its weapons included a 125mm main gun at the front of the hull and 2 Mark I-type machine guns at the rear. Its special high-pressure steam engine and propeller drive system allowed it to run at an extreme speed of 12 kilometers per hour. In this era, it was definitely the overlord of the inland river basin. You seem to be in a good mood, Nightingale said, smoothing the ends of her hair that had been messed up by the wind. Is it because you'll be able to return to your old home soon? The palace? No, I'll never go back. He smiled and shook his head. The Western region is my home. I'm just happy to be able to settle the dispute quickly. Well, half of it is a lie. Roland could not help but choke. He had almost forgotten that she could tell lies. Ahem, well, I actually feel very satisfied that I can produce so many ships in 1 month of demons. This time it's true, Nightingale blinked. But it sounds a little boastful. Love go small say netku, that's why I don't want to tell the truth. It's understandable. She chuckled and walked to Roland's side. Actually, I don't blame you. If it's not related to me, I won't mind even if you lie a little. Roland secretly cursed. If you don't mind, don't point it out. By the way, I haven't thanked you yet. Nightingale looked forward and whispered. Thank me for what? End the strife and pacify the kingdom of Grey Castle. No matter if it's an ordinary person or a witch, they'll all be able to live happily under your rule, she said slowly. I knew you'd do it, but I didn't expect this day to come so soon. It won't be that fast. Even if we overthrow Timothy, the nobles will retaliate and struggle on their deathbed. I'm afraid it will take several years for us to completely integrate Grey Castle. Roland exhaled. After all, history is always moving forward in a spiral. There is still a long way to go to achieve the ultimate goal. It's already far beyond my imagination. I was originally worried that I wouldn't be able to see this scene with my own eyes. What nonsense are you talking about? He glared at her. Do you think I'll let you put yourself in danger? Because I'm a combat witch. It's natural for me to be active in the front line. Besides, I have to pay a price if I want to break the existing rules. Nightingale tilted her head. I was prepared for this the moment I swore allegiance to you. I'm sorry to disappoint you. Roland shrugged. Of course there will be a price, but basically, it will be paid by the enemy. Besides, I have to thank you for this. Why? She asked in surprise. Because if I hadn't met a witch, I wouldn't have made up my mind to take this step so quickly. If it weren't for Anna, he wouldn't have immediately made the decision to save the witches. If this world didn't have the magical power, he was afraid that he would still be in the barren border town, living a primitive and simple life in fear. This is the truth. Nightingale looked up at him. Of course, Roland said with a smile. Suddenly, a golden figure descended from the sky and landed beside them. Your Highness, there are 4 sloops approaching us 20 kilometers away. They have oars on both sides and look like the hawk-headed ships mentioned in the intelligence report. Lightning shouted. But I don't see an eagle statue on the bow. The eagle head probably refers to the underwater ram. Roland patted her head. Good job. Keep watching. Then, can I do one less exercise as a punishment? The little girl looked at the prince eagerly. The latter couldn't help but laugh. Well, if you can promise not to run around in the future, you can do only one exercise. Yes. Lightning's eyes immediately lit up. She then jumped up and quickly flew to the east like an elf. You shouldn't have let her go, Nightingale said with dissatisfaction. It's better to remember when there are rewards and punishments. Roland waved his hand carelessly, turned around and walked toward the ladder. Let's go back to the command room. We have work to do. In the 4-meter-square command room, there was nothing but a wooden table fixed to the floor and 4 benches. Iron Axe, the commander of the 1st Army, Brian, the commander of the gun battalion, the commander of the artillery battalion, and Kakuzim, the commander of the Victory, stood by the table and made a battle plan for the first water battle. According to the information provided by Theo, Timothy's 4 warships are all paddle sailboats. They should be as fast as cement boats, but they're more flexible. Roland pointed to the diagram on the table and said, the attack method of this type of ship is generally to get close to the enemy ship and then jump out to fight. It can also be loaded with flammable materials such as gunpowder or sulfur to hit the target and perish together. But considering that Timothy's original intention is to block the river and make some profits, it's unlikely that he will use the second method. This is our first time fighting on the water, so if you have any ideas, feel free to tell us. Your Highness, it's hard for the cannons to hit a moving target, and we're constantly moving, so I suggest we fire when we get close. Van was the first to express his opinion. As long as we get within 50 meters, I'm sure those guys can knock over an enemy ship with every shot. But I heard that a shell not only consumes a lot of gunpowder, but also that only Miss Anna can make it. Brian shook his head and said, so it's better to wait for them to attack. If they dare to come close, we can use the heavy machine guns on both sides to shoot them full of holes. Roland looked at Kakuzim and asked, what about you? What do you think? The reason why this old man was summoned to the flagship was that he was probably the only person in Neverwinter who had experience in sea battles. According to him, he had encountered pirates more than once during his business trips. Although he was robbed every time, it was still a kind of experience. Your Highness. Kakuzim hesitated for a moment and said, "In my opinion, we should just ram them." What? The other two people stared at him. "Your ship is big and fast, and it's made of steel. I'm afraid that a wooden ship will fall apart if it's hit. Even if it doesn't fall apart, the water will still make them lose their ability to move." He looked up at everyone and said, "Of course, this is just my personal opinion." Hearing this tactic, Roland could not help but think of the poem, "Today the sky is clear and the blue waves are high, and the flag on the leading mast flutters." Chapter 503. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go? Talk.net provides you with wonderful novels to read. Eden was a newly promoted Sir in King's City. He did not have a fief and could not inherit his title to his children, so he was the lowest among the nobles. Love, go little, talk.net w. Choose. Some great nobles even believed that a Sir could not be considered a noble at all and was at most an honorary title. Therefore, he showed great enthusiasm for Timothy's blockade order. Relying on his experience on the sea and the new king's preference for new people, he finally became the commander of an eagle-headed warship. He believed that his strength lay in his ability to judge the situation, and this blockade of the trade route was a good opportunity. Drifting on a ship for half a year away from his comfortable residence was naturally very hard, and most nobles were not willing to accept such a job. Therefore, he could barely make it in, and if he did well, he would most likely be made a real noble. It was easy to do well. Neither merchant ships nor caravans were a match for them. If the local lord sent a knight to besiege them, he would be helpless against the warship on the water. As long as he was not greedy, he would be able to complete this task and satisfy His Majesty. Of course, His Majesty's satisfaction depended on the money and goods he handed over. Thinking of this, he could not help but cast a cold glance at the excited rats on the opposite ship. Yesterday, they had intercepted a merchant ship flying the flag of Redwater City. Although the captain had repeatedly said that he was going to Fallen Dragon Ridge, the rats still happily looted the goods and killed all the people on the ship. What they seized were mainly furs, wine, and a jar of golden dragon. However, these idiots actually regarded the loot as their own, and according to the rules of the Black Street, they divided the loot 50-50. Eden couldn't help but sneer. The rats didn't know that apart from robbing, their only purpose was to appease the anger of the local lords. Once the rebel King Roland was finished, the heads of these rats would naturally be sent to the lords who had suffered losses as an apology to His Majesty. As for the seized goods, they would undoubtedly all be stuffed into the palace's treasury. It was ironic that the rats regarded this mission as a lucrative one and did not even notice the noose hanging around their necks. "Sir, there's movement ahead." The sailor on the lookout shouted. Eden walked to the bow of the boat and frowned. He saw a string of black smoke rising in the distance, as if something was burning on the river. After a while, he faintly saw a gray figure approaching. There was no doubt that it was a ship, but he did not see the most eye-catching sail. "Isn't it a little fast?" the deputy said after staring at it for a moment. Eden had also noticed this. Even though it was moving with the current, its speed was still astonishing. In less than a quarter of an hour, it had grown from the size of a thumb to the size of a palm. Judging from the distance, it was much larger than an ordinary merchant ship. The other two hawk-headed ships also found the target. One of them quickly moved its side oars as if it wanted to board the strange merchant ship before everyone else. "Sir, should we follow them?" the deputy asked. Eden thought for a while and said, "Don't worry, let's see what happens first." He noticed that the hawk-headed ship behind him, commanded by Baron Derrick, was not moving either, while the two warships carrying the rats had already positioned themselves to board the ship. The ship soon became visible and Eden's jaw dropped. He wasn't the only one. Cries of surprise could be heard from the deck, and the sailors on the mast shouted, "Oh my God, boss, what the hell is that?" The body of the ship was glowing with a metallic luster. Unlike the other ships, which only had copper plates at the bottom, this ship was of the same color, including the strange iron tower on the hull. The bow of the ship was like a shuttle, splitting the river in half. Just by looking at the white waves on the side of the ship, one could tell how fast this iron-shelled ship was. A loud humming sound echoed in everyone's ears. Not only did the ship not slow down, but it also slightly changed its course and crashed into the eagle-headed ship that was leading the way. Since boarding required the hawk-headed ship to approach the target from the side, the hawk-headed ship had to move diagonally first. This was not a problem for the slow-moving merchant ships, but it became a big flaw for the strange iron ship. Before the hawk-headed ship could turn back, the iron ship had already crashed into the unguarded belly of the hawk-headed ship. Everyone heard the sound of wood breaking. The slender warship tilted to one side as if it had been slapped by a giant palm. The side closest to the water was almost submerged in the river. The raging waves rushed up to the deck, and many people were thrown into the water. God! The deputy's eyes widened. It's coming for us. Enemy attack. The sailor shouted. Sir, enemy attack. The people on the deck had already begun to move. Some had set up their crossbows, and some were loading their muskets with bullets. Seeing the flag of the high tower and twin spears fluttering above the iron ship, Eden swallowed hard and ordered through gritted teeth, "Tell the oarsmen to move. Get closer to the shore." He had never seen this flag before, but he had already guessed that only the prince of the western region, who was rumored to have made a deal with the devil, could have made such a terrible thing. Not only was it huge, but it was also faster than the slender rowboat. This was not something a mortal could do. "Aren't we going to run?" the deputy asked in a trembling voice. He scolded. "It's faster than us. Where can you run to? Only by sticking close to the shore can we prevent it from crashing into us. If we go around its back, we might have a chance to board and fight. Damn it, go and deliver my order." Pushing away the panicking deputy, Eden looked at the hawk-headed ship that was the first to be hit. His hands and feet were cold. Even though he could not see the situation in the cabin, he could imagine it. The bow of the iron ship had completely pierced into the belly of the warship. Even if it had not been split in two, the long and curved hull would not have lasted for long. The sailors who rowed the oars were undoubtedly the most unlucky ones. Being crushed by the iron head was already a pretty good ending. The most miserable ones were those who were stuck in the cabin and couldn't move. They could only be choked to death by the gushing river water. Cries, curses, and screams mixed together like a pot of boiling water. Although most of the people on the ship were rats, the fear spreading through the ship made Eden sympathize with them. The situation had been reversed, and the hunter had become the prey. As the iron ship suddenly slowed down, the bent hawk-headed ship finally fell off the bow of the enemy and quickly capsized. River water gushed in through the hole, and the waves were blood-red. The second warship was desperately turning around, trying to get away from the enemy as soon as possible, but the Grim Reaper's cry rang out again. With a deafening roar, the iron ship began to accelerate toward the nearest ship, leaving a long trail of black smoke behind. To be continued. Chapter 504. Since the second battleship was halfway through its turn, it was in a worse situation than the first one. In the face of the iron-shelled ship that was rushing straight towards them, the rats were scared out of their wits. A few of them could still fight back and shot arrows at the enemy, but the arrows were no different from tiny sewing needles in front of such a huge ship. They could not even leave a mark on the iron plate. Soon, the irresistible iron ship crashed into the center of the hawk-headed ship at an almost vertical angle, crushing more than 10 long oars. Then Eden witnessed an incredible scene. Under the combined force of the current and the impact, one side of the battleship was suddenly pressed into the water, and the bow of the enemy ship arched upward. The latter raised its bow as if it had run aground on the shore, and then smashed hard on the deck. The hawk-headed ship immediately made an ear-piercing twisting sound, and the rats who were still alive jumped into the water to escape. Those who had their limbs broken could only scream and roll on the tilted deck, leaving trails of blood behind. Eden watched the iron ship slowly fall, and the long and narrow hull of the ship, which could not bear the heavy load, made a series of cracking sounds. After all, the wooden ship was not as sturdy as the beach. Under the heavy pressure and pushing, the hull suddenly broke in the middle, and the two ends of the ship rose up violently, splashing water everywhere. The two halves of the battleship did not sink quickly. Instead, they lay on the surface of the river like a corpse, with only half of the side exposed. The iron ship, on the other hand, looked unscathed and continued to fly toward him. Eden heard a series of gasps. Half of the 4 hawk-headed ships had been destroyed in an instant, and the one he was commanding was about to be the next one. At that moment, he was ready to jump off the ship and run for his life. But fortunately, he made the right bet. Seeing that his ship was completely close to the shore, the enemies changed their course and chased after the last ship, the Baron Derrick, which had turned around and was running away. "Raise your bows and fire sticks." Eden let out a long sigh and roared, "We're going to kill these bastards hiding in their iron shells. For every enemy they kill, I will reward them with a gold royal. Do you hear me? A golden dragon." If he escaped back to King's City like this, even if he survived, he would have no chance of promotion. His only chance was to defeat the rebel king's ship and take it to His Majesty Timothy. Even if the ship was made by demons from hell, as long as the people on it were like him, there was still a chance to turn the tide. Not being crushed by the enemy ship like ants, the sailors regained their courage. These people were used to living on the edge of a knife and were used to seeing bloody scenes. As long as it was not a one-sided massacre, they were still interested in fighting for the Golden Dragon. Ascertaining that they would not be rammed, the hawk-headed boat left the bank and advanced in the same direction as the iron-hulled vessel, which was soon abreast of them. Just as the enemy was about to overtake them, the 2 ships were only a few meters away from each other. The sailors raised their weapons and prepared to fight with the enemy ship first. When the 2 ships came together, they would jump over and fight. This was a common tactic used to deal with merchant ships. However, the deck of the enemy ship was empty except for a long black pipe at the stern, which was surrounded by iron sheets and had a row of small holes in the center, which was aimed at the eager sailors. Before Eden could figure out what it was, a long tongue of flame shot out from the front of the iron pipe. Blood sprayed out from the row of people, and splinters of wood and flesh flew everywhere. The sailors fell like wheat being cut down. Those who came to their senses tried to find cover, but neither the barrels nor the mast were of any use. The iron pipe was pointing at the Grim Reaper. The barrels were torn to pieces, and the mast could not withstand the continuous attacks of such a terrifying weapon. With a creak, the mast broke into 2, and the top half rolled up into the water. The hawk-headed boat, which had lost its main driving force, suddenly slowed down. The turning point that Eden had imagined did not come true. He roughly understood that it was a kind of gun, but because it was firing so fast, the banging sound turned into a continuous sizzling sound. However, he could not understand how the rebel king could use a weapon that took so long to reload and had such poor accuracy. Perhaps the only explanation was the power of the devil. Soon he was covered in a storm of bullets. It was the first time that Lodny had seen such a battle. The Roland was rampaging, using its hard bow and powerful power to defeat the enemy. The enemy was unable to resist at all. He stood guard at the gun position, waiting to fire at any time, but in the end he did not get the chance. When the 4th enemy ship was paralyzed in the middle of the river, the battle was over. The screams and groans of the enemies lingered in the air. The survivors had completely lost their will to fight. They swam to the riverbank and fled into the woods without looking back. His Highness did not give any orders to chase after these stray dogs and let them go. There were also some seriously injured people who were lying on the wreckage and dying. Naturally, no one would save them, and they would have to fend for themselves. What a pity! Jop put the shell back into the box. I thought I could show those guys from the gun battalion the real power of the cannon. Yes, Narsen replied regretfully. Compared with the ammunition consumed by the heavy machine gun just now, a shell is not much more, and it saves a lot of trouble. That's enough. This was made by Miss Anna herself. How can it be compared with the hundreds of machine gun bullets produced every day? Vanner frowned. You guys will be the ones to fight in the siege later. When the time comes, you better aim well and don't lose face for the artillery battalion. I picked you guys. Elite group, Mr. Battalion Commander, you've said it many times. Narsen spread out his hands and said, Don't worry. I promise I'll blow up the gate of King's City within 3 shots. He nudged Lodny and said, Hey, say something. I want to have a warship like this. What? The other four were stunned. I want to have a shallow water gunship like this, he repeated with sparkling eyes. Call it the Rodney. Wait, don't you think you should give this honor to your brother? The second one should be named Nelson. No, no. Brother, I won't give it to you. You two can save it. The second one can only be the Vanna. Don't forget who recruited you into the elite artillery group. Again, Cat's Claw sighed. Can't it be the Cat's Claw or the Jop? Jop muttered in a low voice. No, the three replied in unison. Chapter 505. Your Highness, there's a team stationed at the docks, reported Lightning, who was responsible for monitoring the enemy. There are about 100 of them, and they look like militia. Only 100 people? Roland was a little surprised. It was not surprising that Timothy would set up a defense at the suburban docks. The huge fleet passing through Redwater City and Silver City was bound to be noticed. Although steamships were much faster than sailing ships, and it only took them 5 days to complete the journey that took the latter a week, it was still not as fast as messengers who changed horses day and night, not to mention carrier pigeons. If the new king's spies used carrier pigeons to send messages, Timothy would probably receive the news 2 or 3 days in advance. However, it was surprising that the other side only sent 100 people to guard the docks. According to Roland's plan, the first battle would take place near the docks. In order to prevent his troops from landing smoothly, they would have stationed crossbowmen and musketeers on both sides of the river. They might even have set up catapults. This was also why he wanted to build river gunboats before the spring offensive. Waterway transportation was far more efficient than land transportation, but it also had the disadvantages of docking and being easily ambushed. However, with the ability to attack land, he could easily defeat the enemy's ambush and open up a safe landing site. It seemed that the other side had given up the huge advantage of attacking halfway across the river. It was correct in the end, but it was unreasonable. Timothy could not possibly know the range and power of the 152mm naval gun. Thinking of this, Roland called Sylvie over and asked, "Did the militia carry any berserk pills?" Sylvie summoned the Eye of Magic and observed for a while. "I didn't find any pills. Some of them were not even fully equipped with weapons, but there seems to be something strange in the ground." In the ground? They buried something under the ground. On the docks, too. Sylvie frowned. They were earthen jars and barrels, filled with black and gray powder. "This is gunpowder?" Nightingale could not help but ask. "So that's how it is, then it makes sense," Roland said, pretending to be relaxed. The militia of 100 or so people was just bait sent by Timothy to attract our attention. His real purpose was to let us seize this rare opportunity to land on the shore, capture the dock, and then detonate the gunpowder, sending us and the dock to heaven. Although he said it casually, he did not think so. This kind of tactic similar to the ancient landmine war was indeed a good plan. Even if he knew something was wrong, he would still have to get off the boat. Since they had chosen waterway transportation, the docks were the only way, and Timothy was obviously aware of this. However, he did not intend to defend directly, but set an ambush in the dark to catch him unprepared. If it weren't for Sylvie, he might have really suffered a great loss. However, since they had been discovered in advance, it was still very easy to solve the problem. Without wireless detonation technology, Timothy would inevitably arrange people to ignite the gunpowder near the barrels. As long as they got rid of them in advance, everything would be fine. No matter what, they had to protect the docks. Otherwise, it would be difficult to transport the cannons and ammunition onto land. Under Sylvie's careful observation, Roland found 2 possible ignition points. One was in a shack by the dock, and there was a metal pipe underground that led to the nearest barrel of gunpowder. The other was in the warehouse at the dock. What they had in common was that both of them were moving black holes created by the god's stone of retaliation. After discussing the results with Iron Axe, the battle plan was quickly finalized. First, Nightingale would sneak into the warehouse and kill the igniter without anyone noticing. Then she would guard the door to prevent the substitute from breaking in and igniting the gunpowder. After that, they would use the ship's cannons to destroy the shacks. Even if it caused the underground explosion in advance, it did not matter, as long as the dock was safe. Leaning on the west wall of the capital, Steelheart Knight Weimer raised his telescope and observed the movements on the canal. The slender canal was like a glittering golden ribbon, shuttling through the brown and white plains. Most of the snow had melted, revealing the tender green of the earth. It was the germination of grass, and it was also the proof of the revival of all things. Such a scene was so pleasing to the eye no matter when it was. The only thing that did not match was the black smoke floating above the canal. That was the fleet of the rebel king, Roland Wimbledon. He did not expect that he would actually dare to attack King City. This amused Weimer, but at the same time, gave rise to a trace of admiration. Ever since the establishment of the capital, it had never been attacked in more than 200 years. Any enemy who saw its majestic bluestone walls would not have the courage to attack. Not everyone had the guts to fight in a place where the enemy had the most advantage. At least, King Timothy Wimbledon did not. Unfortunately, the other party was his enemy. The knight respected honor. As the guardian knight of King City, he had been entrusted with the responsibility of protecting the capital, and he had to fulfill his duty to the end. "Sir, the rebel king's fleet is here." A squire ran to the top of the city wall. "Don't shout, I've already seen it." Weimer put down his telescope and spat. "Pass down my order. The 1st and 2nd Cavalry squads are to be on horseback behind the city gate. As for the mercenaries, let them follow the cavalry closely. When the gunpowder explodes, don't wet your pants. Also, start the frying pan, although I don't think they have the ability to touch this wall." The surrounding knight burst into laughter. According to the plan, when the rebel king's troops occupied the dock, the flag on the city wall would be raised. At that time, the strong snow powder buried near the dock would be detonated, causing the enemy to suffer heavy losses and chaos. At that time, the city gate would be opened and the cavalry would charge, and victory would be decided. Those country bumpkins of the western region probably think that King City is like their most magnificent fortress, Longsong stronghold, and that they can take it by building a wooden ladder, iron-feathered Knight Car echoed. "I think you can save the firewood and bring it home to burn. It's better to be prepared." What an idiot, Sir thought to himself. Even if things like boiling oil and rolling stones were useless, he still had to show them to His Majesty Timothy. Because if the enemy couldn't break in, he would be kicked out of the King's City Knight Regiment sooner or later. He raised his telescope again and saw that the unmanned ship at the front of the fleet had left the fleet and was sailing toward the dock alone. The black flames on its head could be seen from miles away. There were no oars on the side, so it was unclear how it moved. But it didn't matter. No matter how strange the ship was, it couldn't go ashore to fight. The ship gradually slowed down and finally came to a stop on the other side of the dock. "What do they want to do?" Sea Car raised his eyebrows. "Do they want to land on the other side of the river? Don't tell me that the rebel king is frightened by the militia of 100 soldiers?" Weimer was also surprised. Normally, people would try to occupy the dock as soon as possible when they saw that the defense of the dock was so weak. He opened his mouth and was about to say something when the front end of the strange ship suddenly lit up. Chapter 506. After a few seconds, he heard a muffled clap of thunder. The sound of thunder came from afar. It was not loud, but it was still vigorous. Accompanying the sound was an earth pillar, which happened to be right next to the cabin where the snow powder was detonated. What happened just now? The snow powder was detonated? It doesn't look like it. It seems to have been done by that ship. Are you kidding me? It's almost a mile away. The Night Knights were in a heated discussion. Weimer frowned. Could it be that the other party had already sensed that something was amiss underground? According to the intelligence gathered from various channels, the rebel king possessed extremely powerful snow powder weapons. Regardless of range or accuracy, they were superior to the iron pipes hammered out by the blacksmiths in King City. Therefore, from the beginning, His Majesty had decided not to confront the rebel king head-on. Instead, he would use the strategy of exploding barrels of snow powder to make those weapons useless. In addition, the thing that was emitting flames at the bow of the ship was probably an enlarged version of the firearm. It could hold more snow powder and launch more powerful shot balls. However, it was much more difficult to manufacture than handheld firearms. The blacksmiths of the entire city had been busy working for an entire winter, but the gadgets they made were not even as good as the catapults. Not long after, flames appeared again, accompanied by the same low rumble. This time, the earth pillar rose up close to the cabin, and the splashing soil smashed onto the roof of the cabin. His guess had come true. The other party had obviously come for this cabin. They had already discovered the snow powder buried near the pier. In this way, His Majesty Timothy's ambush plan would be useless. Weimer thought to himself that they might really have a chance to touch the city wall. In that case, whether the snow powder weapons were more ferocious or the city wall of King City was more solid, he would know after this battle. Just then, a loud noise rolled over the top of the city wall. The sound was so loud that it sounded like a clap of thunder exploding right next to one's ears. The ground in front of the pier suddenly arched up into a small hill. Countless amounts of soil and stones were thrown high into the air. Thick smoke and white mist burst out of the soil, forming a cloud-like mass of air. A violent tremor swept through the earth, and the top of the city wall swayed in an instant. Weimer instinctively crouched down, but Carr sprained his ankle and fell beside him. The soil that flew into the air fell down like a rainstorm, but no sound could be heard when it hit the ground. Weimer's ears buzzed, and it took a while for him to recover from the sudden tremor. Damn it, that idiot didn't even wait for the flag to signal before detonating all the snow powder. The originally flat ground now looked like it had been bitten by something. There were potholes everywhere, and hot air and white smoke were still constantly coming out of the loose black mud. The air was filled with the smell of gunpowder. Weimer poked half his head out from behind the battlement and saw that the fleet in the distance had started moving again. They formed a line and headed for the pier. The militias that were originally used as bait were either paralyzed on the dock, or had already dropped their weapons and began to scatter in all directions. Who was responsible for igniting the fire? Carr flew into a rage out of humiliation and picked up the guard beside him. I'm going to twist his head off. That's someone arranged by His Highness, Steelheart Knight scolded. Keep an eye on them. They're about to go ashore and prepare to raise the blue flag. I hope that the guy hiding in the warehouse can complete the task, he thought. In the end, there was no movement at the pier until the other party had all landed on land. When the earth-shattering roar sounded just now, Alan Abel was taking care of his sword. The huge explosion and tremor shocked him so much that he almost dropped the sword hilt. Even though he knew in advance that there would be such a thing, he still did not expect that the sound of the snow powder explosion would be so shocking. This was still 2 or 3 miles away. If he was in the middle of a trap, what would the scene be like? He calmed down his restless mount, sheathed his sword, and gestured to the cavalry behind him. When the door opens, you will charge with me. Don't hold back the horses. Behind them is the canal. The crowd had not yet recovered from the shock of the thunder, and their response was uncertain. Alan shouted loudly, "This is a trap set by His Majesty. The wrath of thunder punishes the opponent, not us. Cheer up, they have nowhere to retreat." Yes. This time, the answer was more in unison. The group of mercenaries behind him still looked confused. Alan shook his head disdainfully. He did not take these people seriously. He was just following behind to clean up the mess. However, after a while, the city gates still did not open. What was going on? He looked at the top of the city wall with some doubt, but Steelheart Knight did not give any new instructions. The charge could begin at any time, and he could not leave his position to ask about the situation. Time passed slowly. Suddenly, he heard a muffled sound again. The sound seemed to come from a very far distance. If he remembered correctly, it seemed to be an attack from the enemy. What went wrong with the plan? Could it be that the snow powder trap did not make the enemy collapse and escape? While feeling a little anxious, a strange wind suddenly sounded. Before Alan had time to think about it, the green bricks beside the city gates suddenly burst open. Crack! The flying stone debris splashed everywhere. He felt a numbness in his waist and fell off the horse stiffly. The frightened horse stepped on his thigh while running away. The intense pain made him cry out, "Ah, my leg!" "Captain! Lord Alan!" The two squires immediately surrounded him. "Control the team, don't let them run around," Alan shouted while enduring the pain. The formation of the cavalry fell into chaos. No one knew what was going on, and they all rode away. The squires shouted with all their might, but it was difficult to suppress the sudden change. He tried his best to get up, but to no avail. He stuck his head out and saw that his thigh was twisted into a strange shape. The wound was a bloody mess, and the deformed armor plate was tilted to one side. The white broken bone had torn through his flesh and pants, revealing a small part of his thigh. There were still bits of flesh hanging from it. Alan's heart suddenly turned cold. His career as a knight was over. At this moment, the strange sound of the wind sounded again. This time, it was the city gate that suddenly changed. He saw with his own eyes that the two guards behind the city gate were instantly surrounded by a cloud of debris. The scattered wood and flying stone debris swept past. When the dust dissipated, Alan was shocked to find that the upper bodies of the two guards seemed to have been cut off by a sharp blade. Blood mixed with red and green internal organs flowed all over the ground. There were still 5 or 6 cavalrymen lying behind them. The usually harmless pieces of wood had now become deadly weapons. They stabbed into the body like knives, and the thumb-sized stones could actually penetrate the armor. There was also a hole the size of a wash basin on the 2-foot-thick city gate, and the enemy was still 3 miles away. "Devil! The enemy is a devil!" No one knew who shouted, but the already chaotic scene instantly became a pot of boiling oil. Chapter 507. At the same time, Lightning, Vendi, Maggie, and Hummingbird were executing the final blow before the general attack. Since the warship's main cannons fired solid bullets, the damage to the combatants and defense facilities at the top of the city wall was not ideal. Therefore, their goal was to destroy the enemy's line of defense at the top of the city wall, killing as much as possible of the enemy's effective forces, and opening up a safe passage for the general attack. This was also the first time that the hydrogen balloon was used in actual combat. Compared to the 1,000-mile raid 5 months ago, this time, it took off right beside the canal. Almost everyone witnessed the liftoff of this behemoth. In Roland's plan, the unimpeded hydrogen balloon could be used as a short-distance bomber in this era. Coupled with the logistical support of the entire fleet, it was completely the original version of the aircraft carrier battle mode. The soldiers of the First Army on the dock burst into enthusiastic cheers. They all knew that no enemy could stop the attack from the sky, and their wise and benevolent lord would definitely win this war. After a while, the hydrogen balloon floated over King's City, and the towering capital shrunk to the size of a palm. Lightning pulled down her windproof glasses and gestured to Vendi to drop a bomb. The latter nodded and pulled the trigger. A bomb fell off the support and fell to the ground. Unlike the previous air raid, this time Anna did not go with the ship, but Hummingbird. Under the continuous influence of her magic power, as long as the 4 hanging bombs were not out of contact, their weight would only be 20% of the usual. This kind of enchantment was a new method that she had come up with after her increasingly refined control of magic power. If the effect was maintained for a very short period of time, it could simultaneously change the weight of multiple objects in contact and indirectly reduce the consumption of magic power. Lightning easily caught up with the bomb and guided it to hit the catapult on the side of the city gate. When falling in midair, the little girl saw the frightened eyes of the knight on the top of the city wall. They raised their crossbows and flintlocks to shoot at the sky, trying to shoot her down. But she knew how difficult it was to hit a bird flying freely in the air, not to mention that most weapons could not even reach her height. The bomb directly hit the catapult. With a loud bang, a scarlet fireball suddenly lit up and quickly expanded. The surrounding people could not dodge in time and were engulfed by the flames in the blink of an eye. Violent waves of air engulfed everything on the city wall. The pot of boiling oil was overturned and soon ignited into a big fire. Then, the flames flowed along with the hot oil and ignited the bags piled up on the side. Explosions rang out one after another, blasting everything in the surroundings into smithereens. Flames and thick smoke were everywhere. The knight who was preparing for battle a moment ago immediately scattered in all directions. Many of them lost their way in the thick smoke and directly rolled down the city wall. Some of them struggled in the sea of fire, rolling all over the ground to extinguish the flames on their bodies. At this moment, the top of the city wall had already turned into a living hell. Their defensive line has collapsed. Looking at the thick smoke billowing from the walls of the capital, Sylvie's expression revealed a trace of pity. "This group of people deserves it," Nightingale said expressionlessly. "If we were the ones who failed, they would only become worse. In any case, someone has to pay the price for this dispute. If it's not the enemy, it's us," Roland said, pretending to be relaxed. Then he waved to Iron Axe behind him. "Blow the horn and take this city." He did not want to lament the cruelty of war or cherish the value of peace at this time. This was a struggle for power, a battle for survival, and a collision of ideas and classes. When a backward class was replaced, it would never retire from the stage in obscurity. There would always be a need for a lot of blood to die for it. He hoped that the blood would come from the enemy. "Fighting for you, Your Highness." The latter gave a neat military salute and left the ship. Soon, the horn of the general attack sounded over the dock area. As a member of the 4th Commando, Nail's goal was to seize the gate of the palace. After entering the inner city, the team suddenly slowed down. Here, they encountered a strong counterattack from the enemy. "Iger is injured. Carry him down." "Damn it. Where's the field artillery?" "They're blocked by a pile of debris. They have to take a detour." "Get ready to fire. These monsters are coming again." Nail slapped his cheek hard, loaded the bullets into the cartridge, and handed them to the teammates in front of him. A volley of gunshots rang out. The crazed man in the front was riddled with holes and fell to the ground, spurting blood. But the people behind him followed closely and threw themselves at the commandos as if they were desperate. Even though they were shot in the arms and abdomen, they did not slow down. These people were not militiamen. Nail felt his hands and feet go numb. They were all wearing half-body armor or chain armor and were well armed, with everything from swords to crossbows. According to John, who was knowledgeable, only the king's guards could be equipped with such a complete set of equipment. Unfortunately, this knowledge did not save him until the end. Just before, when he was facing the enemy's charge, he was pierced in the neck by a crossbow arrow. He hoped that he could hold on until Miss Angel arrived. "Retreat, 4th team, retreat. 3rd team ready to fire." The veterans no longer cared about saving bullets and fired accurately. After emptying the cartridge in one breath, they retreated to shorten the gap of suppressive fire. 5 commandos took turns to cover each other along the street. It was the first time that Nail had seen this way of shooting in a row since the flintlock was replaced with a revolving rifle. But the enemy they encountered was not attacking them from the front. A team of crazed men suddenly jumped out of a house on the street. Before most people had time to turn their guns, they had already rushed into the enemy's formation. Screams and curses suddenly rang out. Nail watched helplessly as his teammate standing in front of him was cut in half by a red-eyed guard with a sword, and blood splashed on his face. Although the enemy was quickly killed by other teammates, it was obvious that even Miss Angel could not save the man in front of him. "Those bastard artillerymen, where the hell are they? Help me. My foot. Keep firing. Don't stop." Hearing the captain shouting hoarsely, Nail gritted his teeth, wiped the blood on the cartridge with his sleeve, picked up the rifle that had fallen on the ground, loaded it, aimed at an enemy who was fighting with several teammates, and pulled the trigger. Although he was afraid, his past training constantly reminded him that when facing a strong enemy, only by sticking together with the team and exerting the collective strength could they survive. Just then, Nail heard the support troops shouting behind him, "The artillery battalion is in trouble on East Street. Lord Brian sent us to support you. No matter who you are, hurry up and come up." The captain shouted without looking back. Chapter 508. In an instant, the streets were filled with countless tiny stone chips and dust, and the ground crackled. The enemy's body suddenly paused, and clouds of blood spurted out from his back. The dense bullets seemed to form an invisible wall, blocking the charge of the berserk guards. Well done. Kill these monsters. Nail also clenched his fists excitedly. The enemy's armor burst into sparks under the heavy machine gun fire. Being hit in the head and chest almost killed them instantly. Even if they were hit in the hands and feet, they would only be severed limbs, unlike the revolvers, which could still fight. More importantly, there was almost no gap between the bullets, so it did not matter even if they missed 2 or 3 shots. When the gunfire stopped, white smoke was rising from the barrels. The crazed guards left corpses on the ground and retreated in panic. Those who were not killed but had completely lost the ability to move lay on the ground, moaning. In their eyes, Nail saw deep fear. "Raise your guns!" The captain roared fiercely. Thinking of his teammate who had been split into 2 in front of him, Nail did not hesitate to raise his rifle. After clearing the road, the team was finally able to move forward again. When the 5 commando teams arrived at the gate of the palace, they immediately built temporary shooting positions according to the training requirements and monitored the movements of other streets. In order to prevent being sandwiched, the team attacking the inner city was divided into 3 regiments, which advanced from 3 main streets and flanked each other. In this way, no matter which direction the enemy took, they would be blocked by the First Army. However, Nail found that the implementation of the plan was not as smooth as during the training. The South Street was set on fire and almost impassable, and the team encountered a gravel obstacle that the field artillery could not climb over, so the team dispersed while fighting. When facing a strong counterattack, the team members did not pay attention to the east, west, north, or south, nor did they pay attention to Miss Lightning's flag signal. A commando team that originally belonged to their regiment even disappeared, and gunshots could be heard everywhere in the inner city. Fortunately, they were the first to arrive at the gathering place. An hour later, the regiments arrived at the entrance of the palace one after another, and the field artillery was slowly pushed up. The hot air balloon floated above the palace again. As 4 bombs razed the garden wall and iron gate to the ground, the final battle began. Your Majesty, they are at the gate of the palace. Osborne said anxiously. It will be too late if we don't leave now. Timothy sat on the edge of the bed in the bedchamber in silence. Back then, his father had ended his life here, and now it seemed like it was his turn. With the death of Wimbledon III, he took advantage of the situation and pushed the blame to Prince Gerald, solving the biggest hidden danger and ascending to the peak of power. In the following year, he integrated the eastern region and the northern region, and at the same time forced his third sister, Garcia, to leave. His momentum was unparalleled. He had thought that it was only a matter of time before he conquered the western region and unified the entire Grey Castle, but he did not expect the situation to change so suddenly and unexpectedly. First, the crazed army's repeated attacks on Border Town had no effect, and then the sudden explosion had cast a shadow over his heart. Then, in the short span of 3 days, all of his advantages were gone. When he received the news from Redwater City, he never thought that he only had 3 days left to prepare. The snow in the northern region had not melted yet, and the spring plowing had just entered the planting stage. It was still too early to recruit militias, and the letter for help sent to the east was estimated to have just been sent to the new Duke of the Eastern region. In the end, he could only use the King's City Knight Regiment, the mercenary team, the patrol team, as well as the guards and squires of the surrounding nobles to hastily respond to the battle. As a result, the lofty city wall that King's City was so proud of could not even hold for a day. Bastard! Timothy suddenly smashed the candlestick on the bedside table to the ground. Damn you! If you didn't collude with witches, if you didn't turn to the devil, how could you defeat me? Your Majesty, yes, the devil. His voice was hoarse and trembling with anger. The church is a bunch of trash. They claim to be hunting witches, but they left out Roland Wimbledon. If he wasn't a witch, how could his firearms be so much stronger than mine? How could he easily launch attacks from the air? Whether it's craftsmen, alchemists, or wealth, I'm hundreds of times better than him. There's only one explanation. The devil from hell is helping him. 2 explosions sounded under the palace. The window glass rattled, and intermittent sounds of fighting could be faintly heard. It was the guard's last attempt. No, I can't die yet. Timothy thought bitterly. If he committed suicide now, wouldn't it be too easy for the devil? The one who should go to hell should be my brother. Let's go to the secret passage first. He stood up, but his legs gave way and he almost fell again. Fortunately, the guards held him. Yes, Your Majesty, Osborne said with relief. He carried Timothy on his back, called the guards who were guarding the door, and walked towards the fireplace together. This secret passage had both a trap and a dead door. Once the dead door was put down, the entrance would be completely blocked and would never be able to enter again. There were God's stones of retaliation embedded everywhere in the ground, and there were also hidden traps. In addition, the forks were intricate, so Timothy hadn't explored all of them. Probably since the construction of the palace, the underground part of the secret passage had been completely completed. The 6 people walked to a relatively large lounge, where the new king stopped the team and let them rest for a while waiting for the opportunity to escape. It was still daytime, and although there were several exits of the secret passage, the longest one could even go all the way out of the city, it was still very risky to act rashly. After all, the other side had witches who could carry gunpowder to the sky, which was still fresh in his memory. The safest way was to wait until the dead of night before acting. This place was covered by God's stones, so even witches couldn't sneak in. Since we're going to wait until late at night, you can lie down here and take a nap. The Imperial Guard took out a pile of blankets from a cabinet and spread them on the ground. Timothy lay on the blanket. The slightly damp and musty smell made him frown. The two emotions of nervousness and confusion alternated in his mind, making it difficult for him to fall asleep. Where should I go next? The northern region or the eastern region? There were nobles who supported him on both sides, and the duke was also his new vassal. But after they knew that King's City had fallen, it was still a question whether they would still follow him. As soon as this idea popped up, it began to grow wildly in his mind. Those great nobles themselves were fence-sitters. Even if their younger brother was involved with the witches, they would still choose to compromise in the face of threats, just like those guys in Longsong Stronghold. But the church, at least on the surface, would not let go of any witches, not to mention the nobles who raised a large number of witches. Although this group of swindlers were arrogant and slow, they would never sit idly by and watch the devil's power spread wantonly in the kingdom of Grey Castle. If the church could fulfill my desire for revenge, then even if I had to give them my father's kingdom, so what? As long as I can personally send Roland Wimbledon to the guillotine, and then torture those damned witches to death one by one, otherwise I will never be able to swallow this. In the dim light of the torch, Timothy made a decision. He estimated that after midnight, the group of people directly escaped from King's City through the longest passage. But before they could go more than half a mile, the surrounding fields suddenly lit up with hundreds of torches. Your Majesty, run! Osborne's words came to an abrupt halt. At this time, any words would seem superfluous. The other side was obviously well prepared and had set up an excellent ambush here. No matter where they went, they were blocked. Chapter 509. Your Majesty, the road to the palace has been cleared. This city is yours. Iron Axe said excitedly as he knelt in front of Roland. The battle lasted from yesterday to early this morning. After breaking through the city gate, the First Army only spent 4 hours to achieve their 2 main objectives, the palace in the inner city and the cathedral in the eastern district. The next step was to eliminate the enemy and completely extinguish Timothy's resistance. Roland looked around and found that everyone was equally excited. Whether it was the soldiers of the First Army or the witches, they were all in high spirits. If he had not expressed his position, they would have cheered for him. After Timothy was overthrown, he had become the real king of Grey Castle in their hearts, even without the coronation ceremony. However, his mood was unexpectedly calm. This magnificent capital that represented the center of Grey Castle did not resonate with him, nor did he feel like he had returned to his homeland. In Roland's eyes, this was just an ordinary city, not even as important as Longsong Stronghold. The only significance was that the farce of the order for the selection of the crown prince had finally come to an end, and he could run his territory with peace of mind. Of course, a victory was still a victory, especially such a hearty one. He believed that the news of the new king's city would soon spread throughout the kingdom, and his prestige and fame would rise to a new level, which would be beneficial for recruiting talents and promoting the reform. So far, the spring offensive plan, which had been prepared for more than 4 months, had been mostly completed. Now, only the south was left. Roland could not help but look in the direction of Fallen Dragon Ridge and the farther southernmost region. That was the place he really needed to conquer. He took a deep breath, interrupted his thoughts, and said loudly, "Let's go to the city." "Yes, your majesty." Iron Axe stood up respectfully and ordered the soldiers who had been waiting for a long time. 2 columns, protect your new king. Let's go." The soldiers raised their weapons and shouted, "Long live King Wimbledon! Long live his majesty!" Amid the cheers of the First Army, Roland got off the warship and set off for the palace. After passing through the city gate, the streets were deserted, and there was almost no one in sight. There were still traces of a great battle on the ground, and the closer one was to the palace, the more it was so. Damaged houses, uncleared roadblocks, broken limbs, and bloodstains could be seen everywhere in the inner city. There was no doubt that although the process of seizing the palace was short, it was still the most intense battle the First Army had experienced since its establishment. Looking at the ruins on both sides of the street, Roland could not help but feel a little distressed. The exact number of casualties had not yet been calculated, but the corpses of the First Army soldiers that had been transported to the rear had already exceeded 20, and this was the result of Nana's timely rescue. Without the little girl's help, this number would at least triple. Stepping into the palace area, the soldiers stationed here all knelt down on one knee. The road leading to the palace was lined with 2 neat rows of kneeling soldiers. This was a rare sight in the First Army, where military salutes were commonplace. Roland did not say anything to stop them. From their excited expressions, he could tell that these people were not here to welcome him as a member of the army, but to salute the new king as a citizen of Grey Castle. Passing through the lush green garden, the scene in his memory instantly overlapped with everything around him. 3 bluestone buildings were arranged in a triangular shape around the flowing water garden, forming the territory where the Wimbledon family had lived for generations. On the left was the Hall of Sky, which was used for holding banquets and ceremonies, but now it had been destroyed by a bomb, leaving only dozens of thick stone pillars standing tall. On the right was the City Hall and the library, which were currently under the care of the First Army. In the middle was the most magnificent Holy Temple of the Twin Towers. Its structure was similar to the high-rise buildings of later generations. At the bottom was an oval 3-story podium, which was larger than the castle area of Border Town. On each side of the podium was a raised tower, the top of which was built in the shape of a crown, and the other was shaped like a crown, symbolizing the supreme authority of the royal family of Grey Castle. In the middle of the 2 towers were 2 crossed iron chains, which represented the pattern of the twin spears on the family emblem. Whether in terms of shape or design concept, it was an outstanding work that could be passed down for hundreds of generations. Following the guidance of the fragments in his mind, Roland climbed more than 100 curved stairs step by step and walked into the Holy Temple. It was a very strange experience. Obviously, it was his first time here, but he knew every room and every corridor. In the hall, in addition to the guards with guns, there was also a group of frightened nobles. When they saw Roland, they all knelt down and greeted him respectfully in unison. "Get up." Without hesitation, Roland sat on the throne and looked down at the crowd. Among these nobles, he saw several familiar figures. For example, Minister of Finance Lauren Moore, Minister of Foreign Affairs Brent Ferlin, Minister of Justice Pillow, Director of Intelligence Marshall, Prime Minister Marquis Wyke, and so on. These people were all courtiers who had served Wimbledon III, and some of their family backgrounds could even be traced back to the founding of the Wimbledon family. When Timothy Wimbledon succeeded the throne, all these people turned to the new king. Now, they obviously intended to continue to follow the tradition and pledge their loyalty to him. Unfortunately, he did not need them. This was not a court discussion, but a trial. Timothy Wimbledon is suspected of murdering Prince Gerald, conspiring to rebel, and colluding with the church. He is now in custody and must be severely punished. Soon, his crimes will spread throughout the city and even the kingdom. What do you want to say? These crimes are unforgivable. I tried to dissuade him, but to no avail. Marquis Wyke was the first to speak. You have overturned the dark cloud over Grey Castle, Your Majesty. The rest of the nobles echoed. Really? Roland asked with a sneer. When he committed these heinous crimes, did you stand by and watch, or did you help him? Don't tell me that you're done just by moving your mouth. The Marquis frowned. You may not know this, but after Timothy took the throne, he promoted a large number of trusted people, such as Laurie, C. Carr, and Sir Maurice. Whether it was the Knight Regiment or the Expeditionary Army, we could not control them. Yes, Your Majesty, please understand. When he sent Prince Gerald to the guillotine, he even bypassed the court. Pillow coughed and complained. The executioner was also a member of the Knight Regiment. I could not stop him. So what happened in the past year has nothing to do with you, right? Roland's evaluation of these ministers dropped a few points. They were not so much the king's assistants, but more like a group of interests with their own agendas. They were cancer attached to the royal family. Perhaps when Grey Castle was founded, the noble ministers were indeed the king's right-hand men, but after hundreds of years, they had become completely rigid and degenerate. In that case, let's play a game. Play a game. Everyone looked surprised. Chapter 5:10. Your Majesty, I don't quite understand. Marquis Wyke wiped the sweat from his forehead. What do you mean? By elimination? Gallows, mine labor, confiscation of family property, and deportation, the prince said lightly. The rules of the game are in line with the royal law. It's very fair. No, I served your father. You can't. I'm your king now, so of course I can, he interrupted. Don't panic. If you pass all 10 questions, you'll be promoted and rewarded. It's only interesting if you win and lose, right? I can't accept it. Sir Pyle shook his head. This is too childish. The punishments you mentioned must be decided by the court. Your Majesty, I'm not feeling well. Please excuse me. He turned around and was about to leave the hall, but found that the door had been closed. 2 soldiers stood expressionlessly at the exit, showing no signs of backing down. I'm not asking for your opinion, Sir Pyle, Roland said, spreading out his hands. If you insist on leaving, there will be one more way to be eliminated. He made a shooting gesture. Be shot. The nobles widened their eyes and involuntarily took 2 steps back. The soldiers on both sides raised their guns and vigilantly watched the movements of these people. Now the game begins. Roland stood up, clapped his hands, and said, The first question. Did you participate in the forced conscription of refugees and force them to attack the Western region? You can start first, Mr. Prime Minister. Marquis Wyke was silent for a moment. I did follow Timothy's order to recruit refugees from the Eastern region and the Southern region, but I didn't know the second half of what you said. Roland felt a gentle pinch on his right shoulder. I'm sorry to tell you that you only have one chance. He waved his hand. Take him away. There's a prison under this hall. Your Majesty, I'm telling the truth. But you and I both know that even this sentence is a lie. Roland ignored the Prime Minister's complaint and watched him being dragged out of the hall. He said slowly, If you're a little bit smart, don't choose to lie. It won't do you any good. I can tell lies. Everyone stood there, and no one dared to speak for a while. If no one takes the initiative to answer, then I'll call names. He looked at the Minister of Justice. What about you, Mr. Pyle? As Roland thought, this was a trial. He had to quickly deal with the nobles here before he had the energy to deal with the affairs in the south of Fallen Dragon Ridge. It was impossible for him to stay here for too long. In the end, it would be up to the people trained by the city hall to manage the affairs here. The resistance to taking over the city came from the local nobles and the Blackstreet gang. Due to the limited power he could invest, he could not completely clean up the city like he did in Longsong Stronghold, so he still needed to cooperate with the traditional forces. The purpose of this trial was to quickly eradicate the nobles who had too deep collusion with Timothy and were guilty of serious crimes, leaving only the small nobles with clean backgrounds as partners to maintain the basic operation of the city. As for the Blackstreet gangs, Theo could be in charge of maintaining order. After all, the reason why he decided to launch the spring offensive was that he was worried that Timothy would wantonly recruit people and waste them in a meaningless war of attrition. If he overthrew Timothy and left, the city would certainly fall into chaos in a short time, and then he would be no different from a false king. After a year of development, Roland's power was not the same as it was at the beginning. Therefore, although he did not intend to develop King's City as a key city, he did not need to completely hand it over to others like he did in Stronghold. Whether it was the nobles or the church, he had the right to overturn the table. One last question. Have any of you bullied or persecuted people, including witches? After 9 questions, there were more than 50 nobles in the hall, but now there were less than 10 left. This elimination rate was not surprising, because those who could serve in the city hall had already been screened by Timothy. Those who thought that he was not in a proper position and questioned the cause of death of Wimbledon III had all been kicked out of the palace. The fact that there were still 7 people who had not participated in his conspiracies and had nothing to do with the church had already surprised Roland. "Your Majesty, I was wrong." A nobleman knelt down, sweating profusely. "I once ordered my men to beat up a commoner. He rubbed the mud on his feet on my pants. I couldn't help but I only beat him up. I didn't kill him. I secretly had sex with the daughter of a shop owner, but she seduced me first. The housekeeper slept with my wife while I was out hunting. I didn't pass the judgment of the court, but directly cut off his penis." "But Your Majesty, the housekeeper shouldn't be counted as a crime, right?" The rest of the nobles' varied answers made Roland struggle to hold back his laughter. If it were any other time, it would not be considered a crime at all. It would not even be a mistake. But now, they were obviously panicking, for fear that the concealment of these questions would be taken as lies, and they would spill out all of their secrets. After waiting for the nobles to finish, Roland cleared his throat and asked, "Nothing else?" "Nothing else." The nobles all affirmed. When he felt a gentle pinch on his right shoulder, he nodded and said, "Congratulations, you've passed the game." His words made the nobles who rushed to answer obviously relieved. As I said at the beginning, it's only interesting if there are rewards and punishments. Don't worry, my promises are always valid, especially when there are so many empty seats in the city hall. But before that, I have a little concern. Roland looked at the 2 people standing at the end of the crowd. They did not say anything else other than nothing else. In other words, they did not think they had violated any laws, and Nightingale had also confirmed their judgment. "What are your names, and what position do you hold in the city hall?" "Alva Tabor, Your Majesty," one of them answered. "I'm in charge of matters related to the stars." "Blanche Orlando," the other one was a woman. "I'm in charge of the ceremonial officer." So that's how it is. With this kind of position, it's probably difficult to do anything bad. The 2 of them were the only clean stream among the nobles in the city hall. Roland sat back on the throne and said, "You can leave the palace first. When I'm done with the family, I'll call you back." He paused for a moment. "You'll soon see that my way of governing is different from my father's and Timothy's. Don't forget the reason why you can pass the game. Keep it up. This won't be the only game like this." After the nobles left, Roland also left the hall and went to the basement with Nightingale. Chapter 511. The dungeon of the palace was Prince Roland's childhood nightmare. As he walked down the stone steps, Roland could not help but feel this fear. Rummaging through his memories, he quickly found the source of his fear. When he was 12 years old, Timothy took Prince Roland, Gerald, and Garcia to explore the basement of the palace. Prince Roland, who had always wanted to be part of their circle, was very happy. However, Timothy stole the key from the guard and locked Prince Roland in prison. Then the 3 of them laughed and left. In the dark room, Prince Roland was so scared that his teeth were chattering, and he did not even dare to shout. Because he could occasionally hear mournful cries in the palace, The guard said that they were caused by the ghosts in the underground. Prince Roland was afraid that the cries would attract the undead, so he curled up in a corner of the wall, buried his head in his knees, and sobbed. When the three of them came to see him the next morning, his face was covered with snot. Since then, Prince Roland had never dared to step into the palace basement. Now, Roland naturally understood that the so-called cries of ghosts were only the screams of prisoners during torture. Only a few prisoners were qualified to be imprisoned in the palace, so he occasionally heard them. Walking to the lowest floor of the basement, Roland saw Timothy Wimbledon in a small cell. This was also the place where Prince Roland had cried for a whole night. Compared to the prison in the inner city, the environment here was actually not bad. At least it was not leaking, rats and cockroaches were everywhere, and the air was full of humidity and stench. The ironic thing was that their positions had been swapped. Hearing the noise, Timothy, who was sitting against the wall, opened his eyes and looked at Roland. He was the brother that Prince Roland feared the most. His appearance was not much different from the image in his memory. His gray short curly hair and eyes symbolized the blood of the Wimbledon family. His nose and cheeks inherited his father's features, which made him look angular and quite handsome. However, his slender eyes destroyed the overall feeling, and under the flickering light of the torch, they looked even more gloomy. In the past, the fourth prince would not even dare to look his second brother in the eye, but to Roland, he was just a stranger whose claws and teeth had been pulled out. The two of them looked at each other in silence for a long time. For a moment, only the crackling of the torches could be heard in the cell. Timothy couldn't hide the haggardness on his face. Although he still wanted to put on his previous imposing manner to overwhelm her, it was all in vain. The tough look in his eyes gradually disappeared, replaced by an indescribable fear. "Who are you?" Timothy finally couldn't help but ask, breaking the silence. The dry voice echoed in the basement, and the emotions in it were clear. He's afraid, Roland thought. Roland was not surprised that Timothy would ask such a question. Compared to Tilly, whom he rarely communicated with, Timothy knew Prince Roland better. After all, the latter's bad and capricious character was largely caused by the second prince. "I'm Roland Wimbledon." He squatted down and looked at Timothy at the same level. "Don't you remember me?" "You're not," Timothy said in a trembling voice. "He can't look at me like that, he doesn't dare to face me." He gasped twice. "I know, you're the real devil." He wasn't tempted by the devil, but the devil incarnated into his appearance and wanted to steal the kingdom. For a dying man, Roland simply disdained to explain anything. "So what? How much better do you think you are than the devil? You murdered your own father, pushed the conspiracy onto your own brother, and then executed him. In order to keep the stolen throne, you not only colluded with the church that father hated the most, but also forced innocent people to attack the territory of the third princess. You didn't even spare the most cowardly and incompetent fourth prince. In just 1 year, the kingdom was in chaos. Several cities were destroyed by the flames of war, and refugees were everywhere. I'm afraid that even the devil couldn't do this." "No," he argued in a panic. "I didn't kill father, he committed suicide. Just like you, he was controlled by the devil." "Committed suicide?" Roland asked with a frown. "I'm not lying. He was lying on the bed as usual, smiling and killing himself with a dagger. Not a witch. He was wearing a god's stone of retaliation. Damn it." Timothy's hoarse voice was choked with sobs. "Everything happened without warning, and I couldn't stop him." Roland looked at Nightingale behind him, and she nodded gently. An enchantment witch. A thought flashed through his mind. Once the ability was performed, the witch would not be affected by the god's stone. If it was an ordinary witch organization, it was almost impossible for them to get close to the king, but the church also had pure witches, so it was not difficult to get close to the king. Roland quickly thought of the refugee evacuation battles 6 months ago. A witch had infiltrated the camp to assassinate Vendi and the others, and her ability was to change her appearance. If he looked at the two together, the answer was obvious. If the church was really behind all this, then the decree to fight for the throne, which was purely to create disputes and turmoil, could also be explained. However, all this still needed to be confirmed, and Roland believed that he could find out the truth from the high priest of King's City Cathedral. "This is not the reason why you murdered Gerald and expanded the war to the whole kingdom," Roland said in a deep voice. "Especially when you colluded with the church and used the pill of madness to create a massacre. Have you ever thought about how many people died because of this? Even if I didn't use it, wouldn't Garcia have? If they had worshipped me as king from the beginning, I wouldn't have been so ruthless." Timothy climbed to the railing and grabbed the iron bar with both hands. "And what does this have to do with the devil? What do you want to do with me? State the crime, sentence, and then go to the guillotine, just like Gerald. But your crime is irrefutable, and you cannot be punished. You can't kill me, the devil can never stand in front of the stage, and the power of God will destroy you. If you want to get the kingdom of Grey Castle, you must rely on my help." "God?" Roland grinned. "Do you mean the church? You don't know them. The church's hidden strength is unfathomable, and in the notes left by my father, there are some incredible rumors, which is why he has never been able to make up his mind to expel the church." He shouted, "The pill is only one of their means, and as long as your identity is exposed, you will soon be doomed." "It's not like that. Timothy Wimbledon, I know far more than you think, and I also know what the future will be like. This road is too difficult, and you can't lead the people through it." Roland said slowly, "In order to meet the upcoming challenges, your fate must end here. But don't worry, your journey to hell will not be lonely, and there will be many people who will go with you. Go in peace." Chapter 5:12. When Hill Fox walked into the palace basement, he felt his heart tremble, not out of fear, but out of excitement. Irrepressible excitement. The flickering light of the torch danced for him, and the echo of his footsteps on the stone floor praised him. He had never felt that the dark and quiet basement could be so wonderful. After reaching the bottom floor, Theo searched him again, then patted him on the shoulder and whispered, "Go, don't stay too long." Hill nodded and eagerly walked into the darkness. He passed through a pitch-black walkway, and when he was about to reach the side of the cage, he slowed down. This was a memorable moment, and he wanted to savor it. Then he saw the murderer of his wife. False King Timothy Wimbledon. In an instant, Hill covered his mouth and his eyes were filled with tears. Everything he had done had not been in vain, and the result had come sooner than he had expected. If his wife could see this scene, she would probably smile too, right? "Who is it?" Timothy turned around and eagerly leaned against the railing. "Is it you, devil? Have you changed your mind?" Hill walked out of the shadows and walked step by step to the cage. Timothy was slightly startled, and then with a vigilant look, he took 2 steps back and said, "Who are you? Who let you in? Where is Roland Wimbledon? I want to see him." This was the usual high and mighty king. Hill had only seen Timothy's appearance from a distance at the coronation ceremony. At that time, he was wearing a crimson robe, holding a golden scepter and wearing a bright and luxurious crown. Surrounded by the King's City night troupe, he climbed the platform step by step to accept the coronation. Hill had once hoped that he would be a good king who would let everyone live a peaceful life. However, the ensuing full-scale manhunt had torn the acrobatic troupe and her family apart. All her hopes for the future had turned into bubbles. But now he finally tasted the taste of revenge, which was different from the bitterness described in stories. There was neither pity for the enemy nor the emptiness after success. All he felt was sweetness and joy. His heart, which had been dry for a long time, was once again moistened. Unexpectedly, he found that he actually quite liked this feeling. "I'm Hill Fox, Your Majesty." Hill bowed. "A member of the Pigeon and Top Hat acrobatic troupe. You can't know me, but I know you." Timothy's face was cold and he didn't say a word. He didn't care at all and continued, "The acrobatic troupe originally had 7 members, but we lost one because of you. From then on, the remaining 6 people no longer focused on performing. Instead, they mingled with the rats and taverns to inquire about your movements. After that, they would organize and analyze the information before sending it to Lord Roland." He paused for a moment. By the way, we were the ones who sent you the information about your plan to develop snow powder and the forced recruitment of militia to invade the western region. I was also behind the sudden closure and relocation of the 2 saltpeter mines in the suburbs. What are you trying to say? Timothy narrowed his eyes. A traitor who is complacent about what he has done? A traitor who betrayed his king and sold his honor in exchange for benefits? I don't know anything about the pigeon and top hat acrobatic troupe. Put away your tricks, you untouchable. Benefits? Traitor? Your Majesty, I just followed my heart, Hill said calmly. That companion was my wife. She died in your witch-hunting operation. She was tortured and humiliated in prison, and the murderer's final punishment was only 25 silver royals. Timothy's eyes flashed. You remember now? He spread out his hands. Although the city hall issued 3 golden dragon coins as compensation, what was the use? My wife will never come back. She wasn't a witch, but she died because of you. After a while, Hill said, I didn't do it. This weak answer was as sweet as honey. If it had been any other time, he would have only received a disdainful sneer. At that time, the arrest order was executed by Lanry, your trusted subordinate. Even Steelheart Knight couldn't do anything to him. I just wanted a fair judgment, but the court and the city hall rejected my appeal. This is undoubtedly because you led the operation behind the scenes. No, enough, untouchable. Timothy couldn't help but growl. Do you know what you're doing? If the witch-hunting operation only killed your wife by mistake, what you've done is the death of the whole Grey Castle. Lord Roland? Idiot, Roland Wimbledon has long been dead. Your master is the real devil, and you decided to serve the devil for a woman? Really? Hill raised the corner of his mouth. When I begged God but got no response, I had already made a vow. As long as I can achieve my revenge, even if I'm the devil, I'm willing to follow him to hell. He put his hand on his chest and saluted. Goodbye, Your Majesty. It's my honor to be able to add fuel to your destruction. When they reached the entrance of the basement, Theo pointed his chin at him. Satisfied? Hill took a deep breath. Yes, my lord. Please take me to see His Majesty. Climbing to the 3rd floor of the palace, he finally saw the man he had been serving for the past 6 months. Compared to Timothy, Roland Wimbledon looked much more approachable. Although he had the same gray hair and gray eyes, he didn't have an arrogant temperament that kept people 1,000 miles away. He didn't even look like a royal noble. You've been hiding in King City these days. It's been hard on you. The other party's first words also greatly surprised Hill. Thanks to your intelligence, I was able to make thorough preparations and take down King City at the lowest cost. No, it's just what I should do. Of course, I know you're doing this for revenge. Timothy will soon receive the sentence he deserves. Your goal has been achieved, and you can start a new life from now on. But I hope that after this, you can continue to work for me. Roland stood up and walked in front of him, looking him in the eyes. There are still many things to do to restore the city to its former prosperity. The rats need to be controlled, and the restless nobles also need to be watched. Theo alone can't handle all of these things. What do you think? You and your acrobatic troupe can get a secret and formal job to protect the people of this city and prevent similar tragedies from happening again. I'm willing, Your Majesty. Hill knelt down solemnly. Even if you didn't say so, I'd still follow you to the ends of the earth. You've fulfilled your promise, and now it's my turn. He said word by word, the rest of Hill Fox's life belongs to you. Chapter 5:13. Nightingale leaned against the window and looked through the glass at the city under the night sky. The dim shadows continued in the night, outlining the outline of the walls of King City. Under the illumination of the lights, the 3 walls showed subtle differences. The nearest palace wall was light gray, illuminated by burning turpentine torches hanging on the wall. At first glance, it looked like an overlapping belt of bright and dark gems. Further away was the inner city wall, gray and black, like a long snake winding around the city. Even after King City had changed owners, the inner city was still shining brightly. It was the first time that Nightingale had seen a place livelier than Border Town. This fierce but short war had little impact on the lower nobles and rich merchants, and the night was still the best time for them to indulge and enjoy themselves. Further out, the earth suddenly darkened, as if all the light was blocked by the long snake. The most magnificent bluestone city wall was completely engulfed in darkness, and only the faint sparks on the top of the city wall could be seen. The outer city, like most of the towns she had seen, fell into silence as night fell. Compared with the large dark areas, the lights in the inner city seemed weak, but this did not affect people singing and dancing. For some reason, Nightingale suddenly thought of the human beings who had been forced to the corner of the continent. The vast land of dawn had been swallowed by darkness step by step, and demons and demonic beasts were lurking in it. But most people did not know this and continued to indulge in the remaining light. "Phew, I'm exhausted." Vendy's voice interrupted her thoughts. She saw the red-haired witch rubbing her shoulders, walking to her side and lying on the windowsill with her. "Are they asleep?" "Yeah, they've been busy for a long time, and now they're finally tired." Wendy yawned and said, "I really don't know where they get the energy from. They've been flying around the hydrogen balloon all day, but they're still clamoring for stories." "You should thank His Majesty." Nightingale could not help laughing. If he hadn't punished them to do 3 sets of exercises last time, I'm afraid they would have gone on an adventure tonight instead of listening to stories. She looked back and saw Maggie lying on top of Lightning through the gap between the balcony and the bedroom. Her white hair almost covered the little girl's body. The two of them really get along. Since the rooms in the palace were more spacious and were arranged according to the layout of the living room and 2 bedrooms, the witches who followed Roland were allocated rooms in a 4-person arrangement. It had to be said that this was the most magnificent place in the entire Grey Castle. Even the guest rooms had carpets and bedding made of the finest fabrics. Some of the Nightingale could still name, such as velvet and silk, while others she could not even tell the material. Indeed, Vendy also showed a gentle smile. "I once heard from Lady Tilly that Maggie used to transform into a pigeon and sleep on the roof beam. The slightest noise would wake her up, and maintaining her transformed form was also to allow her to escape from danger at any time. Now, she can finally sleep peacefully like a normal girl." She paused here, and her voice was a little emotional. "We bet on the right chips." Nightingale didn't respond, nor did she need to respond. As long as the witches of the Witch Cooperation Association survived, they would all have the same feeling. At the moment of life and death, the Lord of Border Town extended a helping hand to them and promised to bring them a new world. But now, the sisters not only saw the dawn, but also found that the new world was almost at their fingertips. When the holy mountain that they had been pursuing for 100 years was about to become a reality, this feeling of gratitude and recognition was far from being able to be described in a few words. The two were silent for a long time until the midnight bell rang in the distance. Then Vendy asked again, "Do you want to go back and have a look?" "Go back where?" Nightingale didn't come back to her senses for a while. "Silver City, your home." She pointed to the south. "It's only half a day's journey from here. If Maggie takes you there, it won't even take half an hour. You have a brother there, right?" Nightingale didn't expect Roland to mention this. After a moment of hesitation, she shook her head and said, "Now is the time to rectify the order of the city. Potential enemies are everywhere, and I can't leave His Majesty. When Grey Castle is pacified, there will be many opportunities to go to Silver City. There's no need to rush. I thought you would emphasize that you've severed ties with the Guyland family, just like in the past." Hearing this answer, Vendy seemed to be relieved. "You seem to no longer hate your brother? If it weren't for his betrayal, I wouldn't have met you, let alone met His Majesty." Nightingale smiled. "Isn't this what you always say to me? Getting rid of the nightmare of the past doesn't mean I have to cut off the past." I now understand the second half of the sentence. As long as I can strive to live a more fulfilling life than before, it'll be fine. Well, it sounds like a good proverb. Vendy raised her eyebrows. "I didn't know your literary attainments were so high. So I won't sneak away. You can rest assured and go to sleep." Nightingale took her hand. "It's getting late. Okay. The two climbed into the big bed. Vendi summoned a breeze and blew out the candles. Good night. Good night. When Nightingale confirmed that she had fallen asleep, she gently got up from the bed, entered the mist, and walked to His Majesty's room. Next, it was time for her. Darkness was on her side. The next day, Roland received a piece of good news and a piece of bad news from Iron Axe. The good news was that after a night of interrogation, High Priest Fairy had finally revealed the secret plan to replace the King of Hermes and issue the order to fight for the throne. The bad news was that the Church had been instigating this dispute for a long time, in order to weaken the war potential of Grey Castle so that they could quickly capture the kingdom. And in fact, they had achieved many of their goals, such as the kingdoms east and south. If he hadn't happened to become the fourth prince, this plan was likely to make Grey Castle collapse. You heard it all, he ordered Theo, who was next to him. Spread the news, especially the Church's true purpose and Timothy's collusion with them. The more detailed the better. I want all the people in the city to know what they have done. Then Roland looked at Iron Axe. Also, send a paddle steamer to bring Barav and Kyle Sichi to King City. The latter showed a rare look of embarrassment. The director has no problem, but the chief alchemist? Is he really willing to leave the laboratory and spend his precious time on the road? I'll write a letter to Kyle. Roland curled his lips. Not returning home after becoming rich is like wearing silk clothes at night. In layman's terms, when one's skill reached the advanced level, no one would mind showing it off. He and the alchemist workshop of King City had always been competitors. As the saying goes, people of the same trade are enemies. Now that there was an opportunity to slap their faces, he didn't believe that he wouldn't come. Chapter 5:14. There was no doubt that King City was a great treasure house. Although it was very backward as a city, and those seemingly magnificent buildings were not worth mentioning in Roland's eyes, it was still the brightest pearl in the kingdom of Grey Castle. In terms of population, the number of nobles in King City was far greater than that of any other city. Any nobles who had lost their fief would first come to King City to seek opportunities. Coupled with the landless knight and sir, the proportion of nobles in King City was even higher. For example, nearly 20% of the residents in the inner city were nobles, and they usually had elementary education and could read and write. For Roland, they were all potential officials worthy of training. After all, without land and family property, they would not be too resistant to the new policy, and they had good insight, so they could accept new things faster than ordinary civilians. In terms of industry, King City was also very successful. In addition to merchants and craftsmen's guilds, it also had the largest alchemist association and the unique astrologer association. These talents were the targets of Roland's desire. He summoned Barav and Kyle Sichi to recruit them as much as possible. Finally, there was the wealth. The various kinds of materials collected in the palace were enough to match up to 10 Dukes of Ryans. Gold royals, jewelry, and gold and silver handicrafts were piled up in several warehouses. In addition to the other ministers who had fallen along with Timothy, the final tally was bound to be an astonishing number. If all their properties were confiscated, Neverwinter would not have to worry about food and clothing for the next 2 or 3 years. However, Roland did not intend to move them all. It would take too much time, and taking over King City would cost a lot of money to maintain stability. There was no point in piling up money in the basement or splashing it out needlessly. It was the right thing to let it circulate according to its own value. If possible, Roland hoped to spend half a year to properly digest these gains. However, time waited for no man. Compared with King City in the central region, Fallen Dragon Ridge and southernmost region, which were connected to the western region, were more important. Shortly after Iron Axe left, a guard reported, "Your Majesty, there's a businesswoman who calls herself Marjorie outside the palace. She wants to see you." Roland's eyes suddenly lit up. "Bring her to me." When the female merchant walked into the hall, he stood up from the throne with a smile and walked up to her. "We meet again. I didn't expect that we would meet again in Grey Castle Palace." Marjorie pulled up the corner of her skirt and curtsied. "You always surprise me, Your Highness Roland. No, I should call you Your Majesty now. It doesn't matter. I haven't held the coronation ceremony yet, so I'm not a real king yet, Roland said, waving his hand. You're not anxious at all. As expected of a king. Marjorie covered her mouth and said, It seems that the capital will be full of business opportunities in the future. For the sake of our old friend, you have to take care of me. Of course, even if you didn't come looking for me, I would have come looking for you, he laughed heartily. You may not know, but Border Town and Longsong Stronghold have merged into one big city. The steam engine factory has opened several more production lines, and the output has almost tripled. There will be a lot of new products in the future, and I promise that they will be unique in the Four Kingdoms. I've fully experienced your creativity, and we can talk about it slowly. Marjorie nodded. But today I'm not here for this, and I have something else to ask of you. Oh, Roland said with great interest. Tell me about it. Can we talk about it somewhere else? She looked around and asked in a low voice. The Chamber of Commerce couldn't solve it with their financial resources, and they had to hide from the public. Did they really encounter some big trouble? The prince thought for a moment and said, Then let's go to my study. The study on the top floor of the Crown Tower originally belonged to Wimbledon 3, and it was also the place that Prince Roland longed for the most when he was a child. Only here could he see his taciturn father. Roland chose this place simply because the terrain was high enough, so it was not easy to set up a secret passage, and there was only a ring of stone steps leading to the top of the tower, so it was easy to defend and difficult to attack. Can you tell me now? Only he, Marjorie, and Nightingale were left in the room. I'm sorry, Your Majesty, I've been entrusted by someone, so I can only tell you. She bowed solemnly and said, Lord Thunder wants to see you. Thunder? Roland was greatly surprised. The most outstanding explorer in the fjords? Didn't he die in a shipwreck? Although a real explorer believes in the three gods, he won't easily fall into the arms of the three gods. Marjorie shook her head. He doesn't want to reveal his whereabouts, especially not to Lightning. This is why I have to tell you secretly. Lord Thunder originally planned to contact you through Her Highness Tilly, but he didn't expect that you would occupy King's City so quickly, so he changed his decision at the last minute. The female merchant paused. He also said that he found an incredible scene west of the Shadow Islands, which is likely to be related to the ruins of hundreds of years ago. You will be interested to know about it. Wait, he's in King's City now. Yes, he just arrived yesterday. After meeting me, he made this decision. You don't seem to be surprised about his resurrection, Roland said strangely. You already knew about it? Marjorie nodded. So, the first time you went to Border Town to trade was not because of my guards, but to find Lightning? I'm sorry that I didn't explain it to you at the beginning, she said with her hand on her chest. Lightning is wearing a magic stone. Lord Thunder used this method to confirm her location. He sent me there just to confirm whether she was safe or not. After learning that Lightning lived in your territory, he decided to hide his information and let his daughter stay away from the path of an explorer. So that's how it is, Roland immediately understood. At that time, he didn't ask about Thunder's death in detail, and Nightingale's answers were, in a sense, all true. Therefore, Nightingale didn't find anything strange and only concluded that Nightingale didn't have any hostility towards witches. It turned out that there was a reason for this chance encounter. If it wasn't for Lightning, I'm afraid that my steam engine trade wouldn't have been able to open up the trade routes so quickly. Now that King's City is still in a whirlpool, it's unlikely that I'll leave the palace, Roland replied after thinking for a moment. If Thunder wants to see me, you can bring him to the palace. I can promise not to reveal any information about him to Lightning. Thank you for your kindness, Your Majesty, Marjorie said gratefully and bowed again. I'll tell him the answer as soon as possible. After asking the attendants to send the female merchant away, Roland just returned to the hall and heard a guard report. Your Majesty, a noble has arrived outside the palace. He claims to be your old friend and is clamoring to break into the palace. This news slightly surprised him. The small nobles who hadn't been affected by the spring offensive would sooner or later come to inquire about the situation, but he didn't expect it to be so soon. Logically speaking, They should wait for a while to see which way the wind blows. Now that Timothy hasn't been executed, they shouldn't take the initiative at this time. Moreover, he was originally a prince. How could he be so familiar with a small noble? What's his name? Chapter 5:15. Roland almost choked on his own saliva. A slightly plump guy with curly hair, a fair complexion, and stubby fingers suddenly came into his mind. He had almost forgotten about this guy, but when he heard his name, the guy immediately jumped out of his memory, and his appearance was so clear that it was as if they had just parted yesterday. After all, Prince Roland and Yorko were indeed very close. After failing to integrate into the circle of Gerald, Timothy, and Garcia, and being fiercely resisted by Tilly, Prince Roland's mentality was completely out of balance, and he gave up on himself. Yorko's appearance could be said to have saved him. Not only did Prince Roland take him to the brothels and let him taste the pleasures of the nobles, but he also gathered a group of scoundrels to be bossed around, and he felt the prestige that he could never experience in the palace. Not to mention how right these things were, at least at that time, Prince Roland regarded him as his best friend. Roland originally wanted to refuse Sir Yorko, but these fragments of memory made him realize that if Prince Roland was really Prince Roland, he would definitely not do so. Moreover, he also needed someone to stand up at this moment to attract the remaining small nobles to work for him. After pondering for a moment, he finally decided to meet this devil hand who was popular in King's City. "Bring Sir Yorko to my study," he ordered. "Remember to confiscate his god's stone of retaliation." When he returned to Crown Tower again, Roland soon met his old friend. "Oh my God, Your Majesty. I really didn't expect you to come back so quickly, and you even defeated your demon brothers so easily." In the past, Prince Roland used to call his siblings demons, so Yorko would agree with him in private when no one was around. His appearance was not much different from what he remembered. As soon as he pushed the door open and walked into the study, he quickly stepped forward and hugged Roland passionately. The latter patted his back helplessly like before. "I didn't expect you to find me so soon." Although Yorko had a plain appearance and could hardly be associated with the title of a playboy, his round chin always gave people an inexplicable sense of intimacy. Coupled with his clean-shaven beard, clean and fitting clothes, perfect perfume, and legendary superb skills, it was no wonder that he could capture the hearts of many noble ladies. "I'm different from them. Those cowards are still worried about Timothy's power, and I know you won't let them go." Roland grinned. "Since you're back, why don't we go to the Golden Mill tonight and have a drink? Would you like me to meet Lady Rother or Miss Kingfisher? Ever since the last time, they've missed you so much." Roland suddenly felt a chill behind him. A cold gaze penetrated through his body and was cast directly at Yorko. The night was not much better. His voice came to an abrupt halt as he looked around in confusion. "Your place. Why did it suddenly turn cold?" "What do you mean by the last time?" "Nothing happened between them," Roland quickly denied. "What they think has nothing to do with me. Even if it did, it was because of Prince Roland. It was a completely different matter to the real me." Therefore, this denial came from the bottom of his heart. Nightingale should not be able to tell the difference. Sure enough, after this answer, the chill instantly lessened a lot. Really?" Yorko touched his chin. "But you stayed with them for the whole night." "It was past curfew and I couldn't go back to the palace. I couldn't have slept on the street," Roland emphasized. "Anyway, I didn't do anything that night. Do you understand?" A trace of doubt appeared on Yorko's face, but he quickly recovered his original smile. "Well, then let's leave them alone. I'll get some new ones today. You don't know, but there's a more high-end brothel opposite the Golden Mill. I heard that the quality is almost as good as the private collections of the nobles. You can only enter it with an invitation. I haven't had a chance to experience it. I'm sure it'll be no problem for you. What do you think?" "No, I'll stay in the palace tonight. I won't go anywhere." "Oh, I see." Yorko raised his eyebrows. "There are also beautiful maids in the palace. Of course, you have to enjoy them first. Since that's the case, I'll teach you my famous stunt." I'm sure none of them will forget you. He sighed. You used to ask me to learn it, but I didn't think it was very useful for you to master it. Now that you're about to become His Majesty, I'm afraid you'll have several times more lovers than I do. So this stunt should be of great use. After all, human energy is limited. Stop. Roland almost reached out to cover Yorko's mouth. He dared not let Yorko continue. It was a complete collection of dark history. He did not want to be the scapegoat for the bad things Prince Roland had done, especially in front of Nightingale. Listen, buddy. I'm different now. Yorko was stunned. Of course, you're His Majesty now. I don't mean that, Roland interrupted. But you can understand it this way. As a king, I can't be as carefree as I used to be. Do you understand? He recalled Prince Roland's style of intimate conversation and hooked his arm around Yorko's neck. By the way, you didn't come to me just to look back on the past, did you? Just tell me what you want to say. You don't have to hide anything from me. Yorko laughed and said, Then. I'll be straightforward. Your Majesty, can you give me an official position? Well, how about letting me be your minister? I don't need a key position like the Minister of Finance or the Minister of Justice. I just need to manage the patrols or something like that, like the Steelheart Knight. He patted his bulging belly. I promise I can help you keep those rats under control. Roland could not help but roll his eyes in his mind. How dare this guy mention it? If the position of Minister of Garrison was really given to him, the reputation of King's City would be ruined. He would lead the patrol team to flirt with women, and when he had conflicts with other playboys, he would order his subordinates to beat them. Such a scene was terrifying. However, if he could be placed in a suitable position, it would have a good publicity effect. As long as he was willing to work for Roland, he would have a chance to be promoted in the succession of the throne. Moreover, Yorko was a man with a clean family background. He had no bad habits except that he could not control his lower body. The key was what kind of position was suitable for a person like him. Chapter 5:16. As soon as Yorko stepped out of the study, Nightingale appeared behind him. Who are Lady Rother and Miss Kingfisher? What's their famous stunt? Well, this is really a difficult question to answer. Roland walked to the window and pretended to sigh, but in fact, he just wanted to hide his expression from Nightingale. They're just two women I met by chance. I'm not familiar with them and I don't know their real names. That's how the communication between the nobles is. They always wear a mask of hypocrisy. Most of the time, they just play along and forget each other after they leave. But he said they miss you very much. Ahem. Well, they don't miss me, but my golden dragon, status, and power. After all, I was a prince at that time. So after I was in theft to Border Town, they lost contact with me. If they really miss me, they wouldn't be so cold to me, right? Nightingale could only distinguish the truth of words, but could not directly determine the truth of the matter. Therefore, Roland decided to use the art of misdirection to eliminate Nightingale's doubts from the side. Besides, these bullshit things had nothing to do with him, so he did not feel any pressure. As for the famous stunt, it's more complicated. To put it simply, Yorko can use the skills of his hands to please women, just like his title of Magic Hand. I didn't know anything about it before, so I was naturally curious. But I don't need it now, do I? He turned around and looked at Nightingale, but for some reason, the latter suddenly averted her line of sight, her cheeks blushing slightly. I guess so. Phew, this should be considered a pass. Roland felt a little relieved. Although he could have asked Nightingale to wait outside at the beginning, firstly, it would hurt her trust, and secondly, it was not safe if an accident happened. After all, Sylvie was still checking the whole palace, and the list of gems had not been found yet. It was better to be safe at this time. After dinner, Roland finally met Thunder, the great explorer from the fjords. He was wrapped up tightly with a hood and a scarf around his neck. If Nightingale had not gone down to welcome him and Marjorie, the guards would not have let him and Marjorie go. After tiptoeing into the study, Thunder took off his coat and scarf and bowed to Roland. I've long heard of you from Margaret and Princess Tilly. Your Majesty Roland Wimbledon, thank you for taking care of Lightning. I also want to thank you for taking care of Tilly. Roland looked him up and down with great interest. I heard that she received a lot of help from you after she moved to Sleeping Island. Like lightning, he had short blonde hair, brown skin, and a strong body. His appearance was also quite rough, with dense sideburns and stubble covering half of his cheeks and chin. He spoke full of energy, which showed that he had been drifting on the sea all year round. He was completely different from the light and silent image he had when he first entered the room. It's nothing. She helped me a lot on my adventure. Without the witch's help, I'm afraid the limit of the fleet's exploration would be the Shadow Islands. Thunder smiled. Of course, I can't go to the sea that I've never set foot on before and see the existence of the ceiling with my own eyes. The ceiling? Roland asked curiously. What's that? A wall made of seawater that allows ships to cross at will. Thunder told Roland in detail what he had seen. That's why I came to you. Roland was completely stunned. The seawater ignored gravity and formed a height difference like a ladder, and the ship could sail vertically up and cross it as if it was walking on flat ground? It was incredible. Roland felt as if a huge wave had been set off in his heart. If the other party was not Thunder, the most famous explorer, it would have been hard for him to believe this description. This meant that the gravity here had been distorted and formed a unique gravitational field, but the principle of the formation of gravity itself was unclear, so Roland could not draw a conclusion for the time being. Thinking of the omnipresent magic power in this world, he could only guess that the cause of the ceiling might be related to magic power. But he faintly felt that the answer might be far more profound than he had imagined. At first glance, this world looked very similar to the Earth, so he immediately brought the set of theories he had learned here as scientific enlightenment and guidance. This was not surprising. If you opened your eyes and saw people or carbon-based creatures, you could immediately make a rough judgment. The law of matter here was basically the same as the previous universe. This was not metaphysics. The reason why life could exist could be traced back to the speed and direction of atomic spin, which was so precise that no machine in the world could compare. Any change in a constant would cause life to collapse, so there was the saying, life is like a straight flush. Once you wash it, everything is gone. He even speculated that maybe the previous world also had magic power, but it had not been discovered because it lacked a terminal like the witches. I heard that you can build a steam-powered ship without sails, faster than any sailboat. After Roland digested the news, Thunder continued, so I want to ask you to build me such a large ship that can go against the sea breeze and against the current. Money is not a problem. Just name your price. After a long time, Roland said, this kind of thing is indeed not a problem with the Golden Dragon. Rest assured, I will calculate the price according to the cost and invest the best technology to build the ship. Your Majesty, no, you don't have to. Listen, it's not just about you. Exploring the unknown of the world is no less significant than changing the fate of mankind, he interrupted. I will fully support your exploration. My only request is that you remember to tell me immediately if you find anything new. The follow-up details of the discussion lasted for more than an hour, but it was difficult for Roland to calm down. Probably noticing this, Thunder got up and left after setting a time for the next meeting. The prince had been sitting at the desk, frowning and his emotions fluctuating. What's the matter? Nightingale asked worriedly. You look a little pale. Nothing. Roland shook his head and let out a long sigh. I just have a bad feeling. What is it? Do you know about the elves? You mean those small luminous bodies in the epic biographies, the things that fell from the sky to bring nourishment and recovery to all things on Earth? No, I'm talking about a kind of creature with pointy ears. Its body shape is similar to that of humans. It's elegant, agile, long-lived, and generally likes to live in the forest. Nightingale thought for a moment and said, I've never heard of it. I also saw it in a storybook, Roland said slowly. This fictional species originally had footprints all over the continent, but they were gradually forced into the dense forest by the rise of human beings and were on the verge of extinction. Although they were smart, their numbers were far less than the large number of latecomers. Facing the allied forces of the human race, which was 100 times larger than them, the elves had no power to fight back. Trapped in the wilderness, they became more and more backward. Even their technology was overtaken by human beings, and they finally became pets. What do you think of? Without waiting for Nightingale to answer, he went straight to the point. We're like elves now. As a member of the human race, Roland had always neglected this point. Now that he thought of it, he shuddered. Compared to the elves, human beings were indeed a fertile race, but it did not mean that they would always be the most fertile among the intelligent creatures. And now, human beings were the real minority. They were at an absolute disadvantage in terms of numbers. They were trapped in a corner of the continent by the demons and knew nothing about the outside world. This was also the reason why he was determined to fully support Thunder in exploring the new sea. If they could not take a longer view, if they could not actively understand their own situation in the world, they could only be eliminated like the elves. Chapter 5:17. Good morning, Miss Soroya. As soon as Soroya walked into the bicycle factory, Jilly came up to her and said, "You're so early." This made her a little embarrassed. She had stayed up a little late yesterday to play landlord with Mystery Moon and Lily, so she got up half an hour later than usual today. During the days when Vendi was not here, she felt that everyone had become a lot more lazy. Of course, Anna and Agatha were exceptions. They had always been role models for their sisters, whether it was work or study. Especially the latter, she always went out the earliest and came back the latest. Is the base material ready? Yes, please follow me. As one of the first batch of graduates, Jilly had now become her assistant in the bicycle factory. She was informed of the work content in advance by Jilly. A year ago, Soroya would never have believed that ordinary people could cooperate with witches and get along well with each other. Is that the finished bicycle? She suddenly noticed that the factory seemed to be a little different today. The steam machine tools were not roaring as usual, and everyone was looking at a row of brand new two-wheeled cars. Yes, it's our first batch of products. Jilly's face was full of smiles, and her eyes were squinting. There are a total of 20 bicycles. It's not easy. Especially the chain and wheels. According to the calculation, the yield is less than half. It's really not easy, Soroya thought. This factory was completed last autumn, but since then it had experienced various twists and turns, such as equipment not being in place, a serious shortage of staff and so on. It was obviously not a priority as the steam engine assembly plant and the chemical plant next door. The first two plants were currently working 3 shifts, and there were people working almost all the time. However, this factory was still in production during the day and closed at night. Even Jilly secretly complained that the salary of a colleague who went to the chemical plant had been raised to 3 times her, but there was still no sign of a bicycle. Now she could finally get a bicycle of her own. Opening the door of the workshop, Soroya saw that the flat ground had been covered with a layer of white paper, about 40 square meters, which looked like snow in winter. Today's part of the processing is the inner tube. Sorry to trouble you. The little girl bowed. The witch nodded. Go and do your work. Hey, if you need anything, please call me immediately, she said with a smile. I'll stay at the entrance of the factory. Looking at Jilly's back, Soraya knew that she couldn't wait to experience the feeling of riding a bicycle. Shaking her head with a smile, Soroya took off her shoes and stepped onto the flat paper. The paint job of a bicycle mainly consisted of 3 parts: the inner tube, the outer tube, and the frame to prevent rust. Which one to paint depended on the factory's assembly progress. Of course, in general, the speed at which he could finish the painting was much faster than the speed at which he assembled it. Therefore, whether it was the inner tube, the outer tube, or the frame, the factory had a lot of them in stock. However, the magic power grew every day, and it would be a waste not to use it. Therefore, every 3 days, Soroya would come to the bicycle factory to finish part of the painting. She recalled the color of the inner tube and raised her hand to summon the magic pen. As a membrane material to contain gas, it must be light, soft, tough, and able to be melted at high temperature. Based on her past experience, she chose the wood shavings coating as the material. This was also the result of hundreds of tests. The sky coating was too flexible, while the water wave coating was particularly fire-resistant. When she was collecting raw materials, she noticed the wood shavings left behind by the carpenters. That was when she found the most ideal painting material. Unlike Lucia, who could decompose the metal elements and remelt them in any proportion, she had to refer to the real object and draw it. At the same time, she could not remember the magic power characteristics of thousands of materials, so the simplest way was to make a color card. When she wanted to use it, she could choose the coating on the color card to apply it on a large scale. Of course, for the common coating like the inner tube and the outer tube, she could directly draw it without referring to the color card. The magic pen gradually widened, and in the end, with Soroya as the center, it expanded to about 6 meters. When she used the limit of 10 meters to paint, the magic power in the periphery would easily go out of control. In order to ensure the uniform quality of the coating, she would rather spend more time painting. In less than 2 hours, the 40 square meters of paper was completely coated with a layer of wood shavings. Of course, it was not real wood shavings. It was just like when she painted according to steel, the coating she got was not steel. Hardness and flexibility could not be balanced. No matter how hard the coating was, it could not be compared to stone, and it would break like glass. In addition to the wood shavings, Soroya also painted her name on it as a signature. This was also a painter's tradition. Originally, she only wrote her name on the lower right corner of the coating, but later she found that after the coating was cut, her name could only appear on one inner tube. So, she decided to play around and painted her signature everywhere. In this way, no matter how it was cut, the words, Soroya's work, could be seen. At first, when His Highness found out, she was a little flustered. She thought she would be scolded, but His Highness smiled and called her the inventor of the watermark, and even praised her. Although she did not understand the meaning of the watermark, being praised by His Highness still made Soroya happy for several days. Later, she kept this signature style. After the coating was completed, the next step was to burn the paper on the back to get the complete raw material of the inner tube. Then she sent it to the cutting room to cut it into strips, and finally, she used a red-hot soldering iron to melt the joint. Of course, there were specialized workers responsible for this work, so she only needed to finish the initial raw material. This batch of coating consumed almost 1/3 of the magic power in her body. Soroya deeply felt the effect of training on magic power. In the past, finishing such a large amount of coating at once was enough to exhaust her. While it was still early, she said goodbye to Ji Li and went alone to the backyard of the North Slope mine. After entering the mountain road, there was a sentry post almost every 100 meters, and a hidden fort and watchtower were set up at the entrance of the yard. Even the Lord's castle did not have such a tight security. Under the salute of the soldiers, Soroya entered the yard and saw Anna cutting strange parts. No matter when she came here, she would always finish her work meticulously. Looking at her focused figure, Soroya suddenly felt a little embarrassed. Apart from talent, at least in the degree of seriousness, she was far behind Anna. At the same time, she was also a little envious. Whether it was ability, dedication, or relationship with His Highness, Anna was the best among the witches. "Oh, Sister Soroya, you're here." On the other side, Lucia heard Soroya's footsteps and looked up with a bright smile. Anna also put down the parts in her hands and waved at her. Today's copper wire package also troubled you. Chapter 5:18. A Genius in a Second to Remember Love? The internet provides you with wonderful novels to read. The so-called copper wire wrapping was to cover the cut copper wire with a relatively hard anti-corrosive coating so that it could be used in the 3 Supplies project in Neverwinter. This process was easier than the previous coating of the inner tube. At least the thickness did not have to be so precise. Soroya selected the color card and turned the magic pen into a round tube. As long as she slid the copper wire from head to tail, the paint would be firmly fixed on the surface of the metal. Changing the shape of the ability to better exert magic power was a skill she learned from Anna. However, compared with Anna, whose control of magic power was almost perfect, Soroya still had a big gap. She had seen the scene of the black fire cutting metal ingots. It was more like a dance than a work. The 3 black fires turned into different shapes and cut into the metal from different angles, cutting it into a batch of identical parts or directly cutting a complete machine. It was not difficult to remember the magic power characteristics of the black fire at different lengths. The difficult part was to maintain the magic power output of several characteristics when working together with the black fire. To achieve this, magic power would probably be no different from limbs, and it might even be more flexible. Is this a vine? Lucia stared at the color painted by the magic pen and asked curiously. To be precise, it's the skin of a 10-year-old grapevine. Soraya explained, it's very difficult to twist and has a certain degree of hardness, which is very close to the requirements of His Highness. 10-year-old. Did you also have a requirement for the age when you collected them? Of course. She could not help laughing. Young vines are obviously softer and less resistant to corrosion and high temperature. In fact, not only the age, but also materials such as wood, paper, and cloth have different properties when wet and dry. That's why I need to use the color card to record them one by one. In this way, it adds up to more than the formula of the metal. Lucia exclaimed. Not necessarily. Soraya tilted her head and thought for a while. Didn't elementary chemistry say that when the composition of a material is slightly changed, its characteristics may have a great change? However, there is almost no difference in the performance of the color card obtained by mixing 10% and 15% of the wood with water. Well, you can record the whole world with a pen, Lucia said in amazement. What an enviable ability. She smiled and did not answer. In her heart, she thought that Anna's ability was truly enviable. If the magic pen was only recording the world, then Blackfire was creating it. Most of the changes in the town were related to Anna, and the 7 or 8 machines in the corner of the yard were proof. As long as they were connected to the steam engine, they would be able to explode with great power. Through the machine, the workers became an extension of the Blackfire. In a sense, Anna's creation allowed the ordinary townspeople, who did not have magic power, to possess powers similar to those of witches. After wrapping all 5 bundles of copper wire, Soroya's work was completed for the day. Every day, she would go to different places to complete part of the painting. Since her painting speed had greatly increased after she became proficient, she could consume most of her magic power in about half a day. After that, it was free time. Since the complete consumption of magic power would cause witches to be extremely tired and even faint, the consumption of magic power in daily training was controlled at about 70%. Usually, she would choose to continue collecting color cards to capture more new colors, and at the same time, it could be used as an additional supplement to further increase the consumption of magic power. However, these days, Vendi and Prince Roland were not around, and Soroya was a little tired. After thinking for a while, she decided to find Mystery Moon and play a few more games of Landlord. This is definitely not slacking off. It's just a temporary relaxation, she thought. Time always passed quickly when playing cards. The afternoon passed in the blink of an eye. After dinner, Scroll announced an unexpected news. Tonight's class is cancelled. It will be changed to Echo's ability test. Hey, haven't we already confirmed her ability? Lily was puzzled. Why is it now? Okay. Mystery Moon covered the little girl's mouth from behind. I've never tested anyone's ability before. The latter angrily stared at Mystery Moon until the latter guiltily took her hand away. She muttered in a low voice, the most important thing is not going to class. Why can't you cooperate with me? Teacher Scroll, what should I do? Belle, the only non-witch in the hall, raised her hand and asked. Just concentrate and listen, Scroll said with a smile. Everyone doesn't have to participate in the test. Agatha stood up. If there's no class, I'll go back to my room. That won't do. Scroll shook her head. Half of the reason for this test is because of you. Me? She frowned. The witch's eyes instantly focused on Agatha, and Soroya was no exception. Yes, you're too anxious. Every day, you exhaust your magic power to the limit. Your body can't bear it. In Tequila, all senior witches do this. Agatha said indifferently. You haven't realized the cruelty of the battle of divine will. It will never stop until one side is completely defeated. If the Union can find a way to win, I believe they won't hesitate to sacrifice all of them. But His Royal Highness also said that blindly forcing yourself will instead lead to a decrease in efficiency, and that a proper balance between work and rest is the best way to deal with things, whether it is study or work, Scroll said softly. I have already told him about your situation, and this test is also an attempt. Attempt what? Echo's ability to recover. This sentence made the witches very surprised. Can she also heal the wounded like Nana? Soraya was also puzzled. Echo's ability was to simulate all kinds of sounds. Back in the Witch Cooperation Association, it was a dispensable ability. If she could heal the wounded, how could she have been rejected by Kara in the first place? Scroll paused for a moment. I don't know the specific reason, but this is His Highness' idea. She looked out the door. Are you ready? Let's start. Echo walked into the hall and stepped onto the podium. It was obvious that she was a little nervous. Everyone involuntarily held their breath, waiting for her to display her ability. The music started softly, like a clear spring, reverberating in everyone's ears. Then came the melodious singing. She wasn't imitating any sound, but singing with her own voice. In an instant, Soraya felt everything around her change. The stone castle gradually disappeared into the darkness, and her body was surrounded by warm spring water. The air was filled with the fragrance of grass, and a white mist surrounded her like a gauze. Above her head was the sky full of stars. The cool night breeze brushed her face, forming a sharp contrast with the warmth flowing through her body. She couldn't help but moan. Her body completely relaxed and immersed in this extremely comfortable spring water. Chapter 5:19. When he got home, Kalsichi saw a black envelope on the dining table at first glance. What's this? He looked at his wife, Sela, who was busy in the kitchen. Ah, by the way, an official from City Hall came this afternoon. His wife wiped the grease on her hands and put a pot of fragrant broth on the table. He said that His Highness wants you to go to King's City. The ship responsible for picking you up will arrive in 2 days. Isn't he there looking for trouble with his brother? Why would he want me to go? It's simply a waste of time, Kyle frowned. This journey would take at least a week. His demands are really getting more and more excessive. He's your prince, the Lord of Neverwinter, my dear. Sela smiled and shook her head. And the official from City Hall said that in order to show his importance, he wrote a letter to you. This is a rare honor, isn't it? After reading it, remember to keep this letter well. Maybe it can be passed down as a family heirloom. What family heirloom? If it was the complete version of intermediate chemistry, it would be better. Kyle curled his lips and said, Let's eat first. He'd better have a good reason. After a simple dinner, he went into the study and opened the envelope. A small piece of paper fell out. It was about the length of a finger when it was unfolded. Obviously, this was a secret letter sent by carrier pigeon, and the outer cover was added by the official from City Hall. Kyle pressed the paper with one hand and fumbled on the table for a while, then clipped the monocle on the bridge of his nose. His eyesight was getting worse day by day after reading in the dim candlelight for a long time. Fortunately, his life in the small town had greatly improved. 5 or 6 candles could be lit at the same time in his room, but he did not know when his house could be lit up like the bright and clean lights in the chemical plant. The content of the paper was very short, only one sentence. Do you still remember the alchemist workshop in King City? Now you have a chance to tell them what real alchemy is. Kyle suddenly stopped breathing. The alchemist workshop in King City was the most desired place for those who were determined to embark on this path and pursue the truth of all things. Of course, when he was young, he was no exception. Only his wife knew that he had once submitted an application to the alchemist workshop of the King City, using the alchemy formula, molten gold liquid, which he had discovered by himself at the age of 20, as a stepping stone. However, during the review process, Kyle's formula unexpectedly failed. He failed to get any smoky brownish-yellow acid after 2 consecutive trials. Retnine, the alchemist who attended the review, was furious. He claimed that Kyle had deliberately wasted the precious raw materials of the association. Retnine not only did not give him a third chance to try, but also ordered the guards to take away his money bag and throw him out of the door. At the entrance of the association, Retnine took out 5 silver royals from his bag with a sneer and threw them in front of Kyle. He said that it was for Kyle's traveling expenses to get back to Redwater City, and the rest was to compensate for the association's loss. After saying that, he turned around and left, leaving Kyle in great shame. This incident had become a scar in his heart, and he had never told anyone except his wife. Kyle returned to Redwater City full of anger, but he did not give up on alchemy. He spent all day in the workshop, trying to find a new alchemy formula and prove to the alchemist workshop of King's City that their vision and level were just SOSO. He did not expect that he would wait for 10 years. It was not until he was 30 that he found a second alchemy formula and was promoted to an alchemist in Redwater City. It took him another 6 years to become the chief alchemist. During this period, Kyle regarded the alchemist workshop of King's City as his biggest opponent, and he had several exchanges with them in the field. However, the alchemist workshop behaved like an arrogant swan, and did not even recognize any other alchemy organization except the alchemist workshop of King's City. They thought that the alchemists in Redwater City were just apprentices, disciples at best, and did not deserve the title at all. Most of the so-called newly discovered alchemy formulas were old things that the association had figured out over 10 years ago. At that time, the chief of the association disdainfully said that there was no need for other cities to build alchemy workshops, because this skill required a lot of money and manpower, and was not something that an ordinary lord could afford. If there was a need for alchemy, they could directly ask for help from the association. If the lord only invested in it himself, it would be impossible for him to raise a pile of rubbish, even if he spent tens of thousands of golden dragon coins. Although it was a little embarrassing to say it, Kyle knew that only the alchemist workshop of Redwater City regarded the association as a competitor, and the latter did not take him seriously at all. This was also the reason why he was ecstatic about the success of the double stone acid-making method and the crystal glass firing method. The former could produce a large amount of precious acid, and the latter was the most sought-after alchemy product in the market. With these two achievements, even the Alchemy Union, who had their chin in the sky, could no longer treat him as if he was nothing. In the end, no one could have expected that what happened next would be so dramatic. His Royal Highness Roland Wimbledon, who was far away from the border, found him and opened a new door for him with a book called Elementary Chemistry. From then on, Kyle found that everything he had learned had become meaningless. Alchemy itself represented backwardness, and was destined to be eliminated. A new road of exploration lay in front of him. This time, the connection between everything was no longer full of chaos, but orderly. The past grudges had also become worthless. Whether it was the alchemist workshop of King's City or those precious formulas that he had painstakingly obtained, he could put them all down. It should be so. However, Kyle Sichi found that when His Highness mentioned this word again, his heart was still thumping, and an indescribable excitement quietly returned to his heart. The disdainful figure, the dusty silver wolf, the door that had been slammed shut, and the arrogant words that no other alchemy organizations except the alchemist workshop of King's City were necessary to exist appeared in Kyle's mind again. Now you have a chance to tell them what real alchemy is. Kyle glanced at the note for the last time, stood up involuntarily, and walked out of the study. Sela. He suddenly stopped mid-sentence, noticing that there was an open package in the living room in which several of his clothes were stacked. His wife was bending over to help him pack his luggage. This is... Of course it's to go to King's City. I know that even without His Highness's letter, you would still go, Sela said with a smile. Do you remember the stories you told me before? There's something there that you should get back. Kyle was stunned for a moment, and then burst out laughing. Chapter 520. The sky above King's City was sunny and sunny, a good day for an execution. Every half an hour, a cannon would be heard from the direction of the square, which meant that an illustrious person had received his deserved trial. The crime had already been determined before, so this process was more for the public to see, especially the part where the church and Timothy colluded to murder the king and usurp the throne. After nearly a week of sorting out and preparation, the chain of evidence on display was complete and indisputable. Of course, Roland would not give them a chance to debate. In general, there weren't many nobles who were hanged. In addition to Timothy and his men, the prime minister and the legal officer, the rest were believers of the church. Now that the King's City Church had been uprooted, all the people who had participated in the demonic plague incident, he would not let a single one go. Presumably, when this group of scum was pushed to the gallows, they would receive a warm welcome from the onlookers. "You really don't want to go to the scene to see?" Nightingale stood by the window and asked. "Iron Axe and Theo will take care of everything," Roland replied without raising his head. The public trial held in Border Town was to stimulate the will of the masses and improve their loyalty, but here there was no environment to implement it. People wouldn't come to his side just because of the false King Timothy's head, just like they didn't immediately turn to the false king after the death of Wimbledon III and Gerald. He didn't have enough of a base here. In addition, security was also a big problem. The list of gems in his memory was finally found by Sylvie. Timothy had hidden it in a secret box in the closet in his bedroom, but Roland found that the remaining gems were less than the number of people on the list. 4 of them were hidden in King's City, which meant that they had all received orders from Timothy. Although it wasn't necessarily an assassination, he still had to be careful. The execution ground was a place where people mixed together, so it wasn't suitable to go and watch. Moreover, he had no interest in the execution. Compared to this, he had more important things to deal with. For example, the army. The casualties of the capture of King's City were finally detailed. A total of 33 people were sacrificed in the First Army, which was the heaviest loss since the founding of the army. Although they had defeated an enemy several times their number, many problems were still exposed in the street battles. The main problem was that they did not have enough firepower to demolish houses. Most of the casualties were caused by the berserk guards who suddenly rushed out of the houses on both sides of the street and killed their way into the ranks. If they could be equipped with some guns, grenades, or blasting barrels, and advance while demolishing suspicious houses, the casualties would definitely be reduced a lot. Another issue was the number of conscripts. A first army of 3,000 soldiers was more than enough to sweep through the entire kingdom of Grey Castle, but it would be hard for them to occupy every place they conquered. After capturing the capital city, at least 500 people had to be left behind to maintain order. In addition to the upcoming Fallen Dragon Ridge and the southernmost region, the scale of the army was obviously not enough to deal with the war of public security. It was imperative to further expand the army. Roland wrote down the compensation and army expansion plan and handed it to the guard outside the study. He ordered the guard to take the plan back to Neverwinter and the city hall would complete the rest. Then the prince turned his attention to the group of minor nobles. They did not have the power to call the wind and summon the rain in politics, but every one of them could be regarded as a contemporary intellectual who also yearned for the opportunity to be promoted. A large number of ministers in King's City had been purged. They were either expelled from the country or sent to the Neverwinter mines to serve their sentences. To keep King's City running normally, the best way to save manpower was to let them work for him. Barav had been in King's City for many years, so he must have many acquaintances. It would be much more effective for him to organize a temporary governing body than for Roland to select people by force. Of course, entrusting important tasks to the minor nobles who were determined to work for him could also increase their enthusiasm. Yorko was the example that Roland picked. These days he finally thought about where this old friend should go. Yorko shouted as soon as he stepped into the study. "My God, you really killed all those swindlers. I didn't expect that they were the ones who released the demonic plague. I couldn't believe it when High Priest Fairy confessed. It was a disgrace to God. Now the people in the square are praising your name, saying that it was you who saved them 6 months ago." Roland smiled. This was the information that Theo had arranged for the rats to release in advance, and it just happened to coincide with the rescue of the refugees 6 months ago, so presumably it would have a good publicity effect. As for praising his name, it was probably Yorko's flattery. Roland did not point it out. Instead, he pushed a beautiful sheepskin letter to Yorko. "Look at this." Yorko opened the letter. His eyes widened as soon as he read it. You want me to be the ambassador of Grey Castle?" "Yes, a permanent one." Roland nodded. "The appointment letter, scepter, and seal are all available. The base will be the City of Glow, the capital of the Kingdom of Dawn. What do you think?" This was the answer he came up with after much consideration. As a famous magic hand in the capital, it sounded very cool, but in fact, it was not a good reputation, just like Prince Roland in the past. No one wanted to be cheated on, including the nobles. Their wives fooled around with others. If they were not caught on the spot, it would be fine. But they also sought pleasure everywhere, loitering in brothels and taverns. But all of this was done secretly. If Yorko was placed in an important position, or the magic hand was openly allowed to enter the city hall, the impact would be unpredictable. All the nobles and rich businessmen would probably worry about whether their wives would openly flirt with Yorko, and the women who had affairs with Yorko might take this opportunity to climb up the social ladder. This was not what Roland wanted to see. Therefore, it was the most suitable choice to send him abroad. Different from the traveling emissary groups, the status of a kingdom's ambassador was equal to that of an earl, and the king of the other country would also treat him with courtesy. With a resounding reputation and first-class publicity, Yorko did not need to be rewarded with a fief, nor would it cause fear to others. Let him go to the Kingdom of Dawn. I heard that the noble women there are unique and outstanding. Maybe he can make a new world for himself. Yorko obviously saw this point. He knelt down without hesitation and replied excitedly, "No, I'm willing." It was as if he was afraid that Roland would go back on his word. "Then it's decided." Roland smiled. "Before that, I'll arrange for the ceremonial officer to train you well." Chapter 521. Ancestor? Roland blurted out. "What the hell?" Seeing everyone's surprised expression, he coughed twice and said, "No, I mean, who knows if what you said is true?" Then he felt his left shoulder being gently pinched. "Your Majesty, this is absolutely true. I have evidence to prove it." The chief astrologer lowered his head and said, "But I can only show it to you." Hearing this, the other astrologers stood up and left the room. Roland thought for a while and nodded to the witches and his guards. "You can leave now." Of course, Nightingale would still stay by his side as the last line of defense just in case. Astrologer of Dispersion Star walked into a small room next to the hall. After a long time, he returned to the long table with an iron box and respectfully placed the iron box in front of Roland. "What's this?" "It's the order left by your ancestor." He had long expected such a thing to happen. Roland was surprised and asked, "You mean, to close the astrological station?" "Yes, Your Majesty. This is not the first time this has happened," the astrologer said with a wry smile. "Although we and alchemy are called the school of sages, in fact, we are not equal. Alchemy can bring a lot of income to the kingdom, but we need to invest a large amount of golden dragon in purchasing high-quality crystals and hiring craftsmen every year. In order to prevent future successors from disbanding the Astrological Association to save money, your ancestor engraved the order and asked no one to disobey it." When Roland opened the box, he saw a stack of gold sheets. It seemed that the Wimbledon family had spared no expense in preserving this order. They had chosen gold, which was extremely stable, as the base material for the book. He poured all the gold sheets on the table and roughly counted them. There were 8 of them, each about 3 millimeters thick and the size of 2 palms. They were heavy in his hand. The first one was written with the original words of the chief astrologer. "No one can interfere with the starry sky in the astrological station because there is a mystery that reveals the fate of the world." The latter part of the sentence caught Roland's attention. In fact, the association itself was very strange. If astrology was really effective, Wimbledon 3 would not have been replaced by the church when he was defenseless. Instead, he would have hanged the high priest long ago. Moreover, even the astrologer of Dispersion Star had mentioned that the astrology platform produced very little. In other words, he did not treat divination as a product. His helpless expression was completely different from the one he had when they first met. To put it simply, the ancestors spent a lot of money and manpower to establish such an organization. At the same time, they were afraid that their descendants would shut it down because it had no prophetic ability, so they did not hesitate to engrave the decree on the gold plate. Roland didn't believe that the other party was an astronomy enthusiast, or that he had set his sights beyond the planet during the reclamation phase. Obviously, the astrologers had a task that had nothing to do with divination, and this was most likely related to the second half of the sentence. He flipped through the rest of the gold plates but didn't find any relevant description. Instead, it recorded the history of the Astrology Association and the basic methods of observing the stars. The last piece even had the principle of magnifying the crystal lens. The ancestor of the Wimbledon family seemed to have been the chief astrologer here, and there was also a person with a higher status. However, when Roland briefly reviewed the family history, he found that there was no such information. He picked up the first piece of the book again and pointed to the last half of the sentence. "What does this mean?" "I'm not sure," the astrologer of Dispersion said, shaking his head. Before his voice trailed off, Roland felt his right shoulder being pinched. He could not help but chuckle. "Listen, rules are dead, but people are alive. The decree left by the ancestor was probably correct when he was still alive, but times have changed. I don't want to be bound by a rule that has lasted for hundreds of years. Now I'm the king of Grey Castle, and I can do whatever I want. Do you understand?" The astrologer of Dispersion Star widened his eyes. "What? Even you know that you're wasting your money. You know nothing about the mysteries of the fate of the world. When Father was murdered by the church, you didn't even warn him. Why should I keep you here staring at the sky like idiots? Stars can't be exchanged for a golden dragon. Pack up and prepare to go to the western region with me." The astrologer of Dispersion Star's face darkened when he heard Roland's words, thanks to the bad impression that Prince Roland had left on him in the king's city. After a long time, he gritted his teeth and said, "You'll probably regret knowing this news." "How would I know if you don't tell me?" Roland smiled. He had to admit that sometimes it was quite effective to pretend to be Prince Roland's playboy to intimidate others. For this group of old people, he couldn't ask Iron Axe to interrogate them, so he had to use this method to find out the answer. "We're shouldering a mission that has lasted for hundreds of years. It started when Lord Wimbledon first arrived in this region." The astrologer calmed down and said, "It's not that we can't tell the royal family, but only the heir who becomes the king, and he must wait until he's 30 years old. "Why?" "Because your ancestors thought that letting the heir know this news too early might make him panic and confused, which would lead to the decline of the kingdom." He hesitated for a moment. "We're looking for the star of extinction." Roland was stunned. "What's that? A scarlet star, or the crimson moon?" "When it comes, the world will be plunged into an irrecoverable disaster." The prince's heart skipped a beat. Both the ancient book in the ruins and Agatha, who belonged to the Union, had mentioned the Crimson Moon. Why would a secular organization pay attention to this? Was the Astrology Association inextricably linked to the Union? "Tell me more details." "All I know is what the former chief told me," Dispersion Star said in a low voice. "It said that there's a red star floating in the sky. When it appears in the night sky like a crescent moon, the world will be destroyed. Our duty is to find it before it turns into a moon. If we can find its trajectory, we can predict the doomsday in advance. This is also the original purpose of astrology. Turn into a moon." Chapter 522. Roland shook his head with a smile as he watched Yorko leave in high spirits after saluting. He didn't mind helping those who had helped the fourth prince if they didn't have evil intentions. "Where's Vendi now?" Roland turned to ask Nightingale after dealing with this matter. "Probably practicing her ability at the top of the tower. Do you need me to call her?" "Call Sylvie, Lightning, and Maggie too. Let's go meet the astrologers. Roland nodded and said, We'll fly there. I see. Nightingale's eyes lit up. Even if someone wanted to ambush him, they could not pose any threat to the hydrogen balloon in the sky. This trip was absolutely safe. The messenger had told him about Kyle's departure, so the alchemist workshop could be put aside for the time being. As another sage organization, he was very curious about the Astrology Association. Moreover, Roland had a huge doubt in his mind, waiting to be verified. The Astrology Association was located on a high ground in the northern part of the outer city. It was the second highest point in the capital after the palace towers. The astrology hall built on it was very unique. Looking down from the sky, it looked like a hexagonal stone tower with a flat top. It was wide at the bottom and narrow at the top, and its outline was quite symmetrical. Roland naturally knew what symmetry meant in this era. Without excellent surveying skills and positioning tools, it was difficult to stack a large stone building in such a neat manner. It could be said that its construction was much more difficult than the magnificent bluestone city wall. The guards who had set off earlier had already surrounded the stone tower. After the hydrogen balloon was discharged, it slowly landed on the top of the tower. Brian, Sean, and Alva Tabor immediately came to greet them. Your Majesty, the scene has been completely sealed off. I guarantee that not even a rat will sneak in. All the astrologers' gods' stones of retaliation have been confiscated. They will not hinder Miss Sylvie's surveillance. You can contact them without worry. But stay alert. Roland nodded approvingly and then looked at the row of gray-robed people standing behind them. Most of them were over 30 years old, and they looked a little flustered. From time to time, they raised their heads to look at the hydrogen balloon. Obviously, they had not recovered from their sudden arrival. He looked at Alva and asked, Who's in charge here? Ask him to come see me. Alva went over and said a few words to the two elders in gray robes. One of them followed him cautiously and said, Your Majesty, this is the chief astrologer of the king's city, astrologer of Dispersion Star. Your Majesty, Roland Wimbledon, your arrival makes the stars shine. Your Majesty, Roland Wimbledon, Your Majesty. You may not know this, but this is the tradition of the Astrology Association, Alva explained hurriedly. Every astrologer yearns to be named after the stars. Only those who discover new stars are qualified to receive this honor. So you found something? Dispersion Star? Yes, Your Majesty, the old man said with his hand on his chest. It and the other 3 dark stars form the diffuse star circle. In divination, it symbolizes death and reincarnation. What about them? Roland pointed at the other gray-robed men. They are all astrology masters of the astrological station, so they naturally have their own discoveries. Dispersion Star introduced them one by one respectfully. They can interpret the meaning of the changes of the stars and the alternation of the sun and the moon for you. Of course, so can I. I didn't come here to have my fortune told. The other party was startled. Your Majesty, may I ask why you are here? Exploring the stars. Roland shrugged. Don't stand here in the wind. Let's talk in the room. By the way, bring me all the star charts you've discovered. You should have recorded these things, right? Mark the brightest stars and connect them with a thin line. Yes, that's it. Stacks of drawings were soon piled up on the long table in the hall. Some of the parchments were yellow, indicating that they had been drawn for a long time. Roland took a deep breath and drew a spoon and an hourglass on a piece of white paper with his pen. He then connected the brightest stars with a line according to the star chart. Your Majesty, this is. The scholar said in surprise. 2 star charts. He held up the white paper and showed it to the others. Have you ever seen such a pattern? The astrologers shook their heads. Look for the similar ones among these drawings, Roland ordered. Everyone take a stack. Don't miss a single drawing. The biggest question in his mind was this another plane of Earth? It was not strange that there was a sun and a moon. The sun was just an ordinary star. There were hundreds of billions of such stars in the Milky Way, and there were hundreds of billions of galaxies like the Milky Way in the universe. Therefore, It was not strange to encounter a stable star satellite system. The universe was so vast that anything could happen. However, he was not sure if the species were similar. The evolution of living things was full of coincidences. Even in the same environment, different life forms could grow up. Moreover, regardless of whether it was demonic beasts or demons, they didn't look like living beings born in the natural world. To solve this problem, he could only think of the star charts. The lifespan of a star was calculated in hundreds of millions, and its position was almost fixed. It had always been used by stargazers to determine the position or to place symbols on it. The only two star charts that Roland remembered were the well-known Big Dipper and Orion. If he could find them in the star chart, he could determine his position. After an hour, Roland still received no answer. During this period, he also asked the astrologer of Dispersion Star about several famous star charts, but he had no impression of the names. Moreover, the astrologers of Grey Castle did not have the concept of astronomical phenomena according to the ecliptic, so they naturally did not have the famous 12 zodiac signs. In general, the density of the bright stars on these star charts was far greater than that of the constellations he had seen. In a sense, the stars would only appear when the observation point was closer to the center of the galaxy. Because the closer to the center of the galaxy, the more stars there were. Therefore, the possibility of this place being Earth was very small. This answer made Roland feel slightly disappointed. He exhaled and glanced around the hall. How many people are there in the Astrology Association? Your Majesty, there are 9 astrologers, 156 apprentices, and 67 handymen and craftsmen, the astrologer of Dispersion Star replied. Your Majesty, I plan to close the astrological station. Pack up and follow me back to Neverwinter. His words made everyone's expression change. Alva said in a panic, Your Majesty, how can you? I don't believe in divination. I only believe in my own choices, Roland said casually. And I'm the king of Grey Castle, so I can naturally close this place. In the Western region, you'll learn the real knowledge of astrology instead of seeing it as an illusory trajectory of fate. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.